Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world where medicine feels less like science and more like a mashup between astrology, kitchen experiments, and a very determined guess. You find yourself standing in a dim medieval infirmary, the air warm from a crackling hearth, the smell of rosemary drifting lazily through the rafters, candles flicker against stone walls, and you can hear someone outside arguing about whether cold wind can actually bruise a person. Meanwhile, you're about to meet a doctor who thinks the secret to your survival lies inside a system of ancient body juices called the Four Humours, and trust me, you probably won't survive this if he's in charge. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing those check-ins from all over the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward across the uneven stone floor, passing shelves stacked with ceramic jars. Each jar is labelled in spiky ink: hot, moist, dry, cold. The doctor insists that every part of your personality, your health and your fate is determined by how these qualities combine to form your humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile. According to him, you're basically a walking soup. And like any soup, the temperature must be carefully maintained. If you're too warm, he'll cool you down. If you're too cold, he'll wrap you in wool until you resemble a disgruntled sheep. The strange thing is, to him this isn't guesswork. This is the medical mainstream, taught in universities, copied from ancient Greek texts, and accepted across Europe. Long before germ theory, your doctor believes invisible miasmas float through the air like ghostly stink clouds, and disease happens when these bad vapours disrupt your inner balance. Historians still argue whether most medieval physicians truly believed humours were literal fluids sloshing around, or if they treated them more as metaphors for bodily systems. But either way, the outcome is the same. You're about to be told your fever is caused by too much hot humour, and probably too much enthusiasm in general. As you sit on a wooden stool, the doctor examines you. Not with a stethoscope. Those won't exist for centuries, but with a long stare and a sigh that suggests you've somehow personally offended him. He touches your forehead, not to check your temperature but to sense the quality of your heat. This is a clinical distinction that only he understands. Then he announces that your body is overrun by an excess of blood, the warm, moist humour responsible for vigour and passion. Apparently you've lived too energetically, which is rude but not inaccurate. He tells you that balance must be restored, and that every cure is about shifting your inner thermostat. If you're too hot, he prescribes cooling foods like lettuce, cucumber, or if he's feeling spicy, a very sad-looking fish. If you're too cold, he prescribes wine, spices, or maybe a brisk walk in a heated room, which is technically just pacing in a kitchen. Humorism turns the entire world into a list of hot and cold objects. Even colours are assigned temperatures. Red is hot, blue is cold, yellow is dry, green is moist. It's like he's running your health through a medieval version of a dating app. Swipe right if the dinner matches your humoral imbalance. Your doctor also glances at the fire, watching how the smoke rises. This gives him clues about the state of your internal moisture. Modern you wants to laugh, but back then this was considered high-level diagnostic insight. One quirky detail you notice is the cloth pouch tied around his belt filled with dried rose petals. He believes sniffing roses helps prevent corruption of the humours, and honestly, after spending time in this room, you're tempted to agree. At least it smells better than the boiled onion mixture simmering in the corner. He gestures for you to breathe deeply, not to check lung function, but to let your humours speak. You exhale, and he nods gravely, as if your breath just confessed a crime. He mutters something about imbalanced phlegm, which is his polite way of saying you look tired and maybe a little grumpy. Phlegm is the cold, moist humour responsible for calmness, indifference, and those mornings when you simply cannot deal with anyone. Too much of it, he says, makes you slow and melancholy. Not enough, and you become irritable. You begin to suspect he's not diagnosing your body at all, just your personality. A mainstream historical fact hits you as you sit there. Large universities like those in Paris, Bologna, and Oxford actually trained physicians in humoral theory as the scientific foundation of Western medicine for centuries. Entire textbooks, thick, heavy, sleep-inducing volumes, explained how weather, diet, emotions, and even the phase of the moon could change your internal temperature. Meanwhile, a fringe tidbit hums in the background. Some doctors believed your humours could be influenced by you simply staring too long at a certain colour. That's right. Looking at too much red could theoretically raise your heat. It's the medieval equivalent of claiming your wallpaper is hazardous. The doctor then brings out a small mirror, holds it under your mouth, and checks the condensation pattern. This, he explains with confidence, helps reveal whether your humours are ascending or descending, a phenomenon historians still debate due to vague descriptions in the surviving manuscripts. You wonder whether he's improvising. He might be, but you also have a fever, so who knows? Maybe your humours are indeed trying to climb a ladder inside your torso. He finishes by placing a hand on your wrist, counting your pulse, not to measure beats per minute, but to sense whether the rhythm is full, thin, wandering, or sluggish. Each pulse type corresponds to a humoral imbalance and sometimes to personality traits. A thin pulse might mean dehydration, or simply that you're an introvert. A wandering pulse suggests your humours are confused, which is fair because you're confused too. He steps back, satisfied, and hands you a written prescription consisting mostly of dietary advice, heating or cooling instructions, and at least one ingredient you've never heard of. Something like dragon's blood resin, which is actually plant sap. But he doesn't tell you that because it sounds way cooler. And just like that, the foundation of medieval medicine rests gently, absurdly, almost comfortingly on you. The belief that everything in your body can be understood by imagining yourself as a fragile, occasionally overheated cauldron that needs constant adjusting. You barely have time to adjust to the idea that your body is a simmering stew of moody humours before the medieval doctor decides the next logical step is to let some of that stew out. You're ushered toward a long wooden table where a collection of knives, cups and bowls waits like the world's least appetizing buffet. The air smells faintly metallic, and the doctor announces that you, my friend, need bleeding, the crown jewel of medieval healthcare. You brace yourself because you already know this can't end well. He explains it with the same calm confidence someone today might use while recommending vitamin supplements. According to him, your overabundance of warm, moist blood is causing you to be flushed, restless, and possibly too enthusiastic about life. And as we learned back in section 1, enthusiasm is medically suspicious. His solution? Release some of that excess blood so your humours can return to harmony. Simple, elegant, horrifying. You sit on a stool again while he rolls up your sleeve like a barista preparing to make latte art. He selects a small knife, not too sharp, not too dull, just perfectly calibrated for what he cheerfully calls a modest opening. Your modern brain screams, but medieval you nod politely, because refusing a trained doctor involves uncomfortable questions about your sanity. The doctor assures you that people of all classes undergo bleeding regularly. Kings, peasants, merchants, even monks get bled, especially after big meals. You suddenly imagine a monk waddling out of the dining hall and into a bleeding session like it's dessert. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. Bloodletting was one of the most widely practiced medical treatments in Europe for more than 1,000 years, endorsed by university-trained physicians and local healers alike. Some cities even passed laws regulating who could perform it, leading to barber surgeons. Yes, barbers, becoming go-to professionals for both haircuts and controlled blood loss. It's the ultimate two birds, one stone situation, except one bird is your hair and the other is your circulatory stability. The doctor tightens a cloth around your arm to make the veins swell. He leans closer, squinting with the seriousness of someone trying to read a mysterious medieval riddle, which, to be fair, your veins probably feel like to him. He taps along your forearm with a fingertip, then mutters something about excess heat migrating upward. Historians still argue whether medieval doctors genuinely believed bleeding could redirect internal energies, or if this was just elegant medical poetry. Either way, the knife is coming. But before he makes the cut, he offers you a choice of bowl size, as casually as someone asking if you'd like a small or large soda. You choose the smaller bowl because you'd like to stay awake for the rest of this section. He nods approvingly, saying too much bleeding can cause fainting, dizziness, or a dangerous cooling of the spirits. You interpret that as you might pass out, which honestly sounds like a welcome shortcut through whatever's about to happen. As he works, he explains the logic behind the procedure. When humours are imbalanced, Especially when the blood humour gets too strong, it pushes upward, creating fevers, headaches, and poor judgment. Removing some of that hot blood supposedly cools and stabilizes the body. It's basically medieval air conditioning. And because almost every illness, from fevers to stomach aches to bad moods, could be blamed on one humour overpowering another, bleeding became the universal tool. If in doubt, let it out. A quirky tidbit pops up. Some medieval doctors believed certain veins corresponded to specific organs. For example, bleeding the ankle was thought to help with headaches, while bleeding the arm could treat liver heat. It's like a very stressful version of acupuncture, except instead of thin needles, you get a controlled leak. The doctor finally nicks your arm, just a tiny cut, but enough for a small stream of blood to flow into the waiting bowl. You try to look away, but he insists that observing your own blood helps strengthen the nervous spirits. Medieval psychology is wild. You stare stiffly at the wall, listening to the soft drip of blood like a very unsettling metronome. The doctor watches the colour of your blood with intense concentration. To him, it's not just red liquid, it's a diagnostic revelation. If it's too dark, you've got too much black bile influence. If it's too bright, the yellow bile is acting up. If it clots oddly, your phlegm is causing sluggishness. The doctor narrates your inner chaos as if he's reporting on the weather. Some local dryness, perhaps, a rising heat in the upper humours, and a touch of melancholy in the lower regions. You're tempted to ask if your spleen is retrograde. Today? A strange form of reassurance flows in. You remember reading that medieval people didn't necessarily expect bleeding to feel soothing. They simply believed it was necessary maintenance, like taking your car in for an oil change. In fact, many households scheduled routine bleedings around the calendar. One fringe tidbit. Some farmers believed their livestock also needed seasonal bleeding to prevent them from becoming overheated. Imagine trying to explain that to a cow. As you sit there, the doctor places a warm cloth over the cut to slow the flow. He declares the colour is sufficiently tempered, which seems like a polite way of saying he's bored now. He then rubs a mixture of honey and herbs over the wound. Honey was actually a reasonably good antibacterial agent, one of the rare places medieval medicine accidentally nailed it. He wraps your arm with linen and tells you to avoid exertion, spicy foods, or sudden joy for at least a day. Apparently happiness is bad for freshly balanced humours. Your head feels a little light, but the doctor beams with pride. He truly believes he's saved you from fever, from imbalance, and possibly from yourself. Meanwhile, you're just glad your arm is still attached. And as you stand, the doctor hands you a tiny packet of dried herbs to support your cooler state. You sniff them. They smell like something halfway between a garden and a dusty attic. He claims they'll maintain harmony and prevent your humours from misbehaving overnight. You walk away knowing that in this world, bleeding wasn't just a cure, it was a worldview, a ritual, and sometimes a social event. And while modern medicine has thankfully retired the practice, you can't help but appreciate how sincerely and confidently those medieval doctors tried to fix the human body with the tools and theories they had. You shuffle onward through the dim corridor, your freshly bandaged arm reminding you that medieval medicine is more interactive than you'd like. But before you can fully recover from the bleeding session, your doctor beckons you into another room, one that smells like a spice market collided with a damp forest floor. Shelves line every wall, stuffed with bundles of herbs, jars of powders, bottles of murky liquids, and at least one suspiciously crunchy-looking plant hanging upside down like a bat. This is the medieval pharmacy, and you're about to learn why herbs, spices, and the strangest brews were considered top-tier cures. The doctor gestures proudly at his collection. He insists that every plant in this room has a temperament, hot, cold, dry, or moist, just like you and your humours. He holds up a piece of cinnamon bark and explains that cinnamon is warming, which means it can counteract cold diseases such as lethargy, shivering fevers, or what he dramatically calls winter melancholy. You nod politely, mostly because cinnamon reminds you of pastries and that's comforting. He doesn't need to know that. A mainstream historical fact rings softly in your mind. Medieval herbalism was heavily influenced by texts like the Herbarium and the writings of Galen, which assigned medical properties to plants based on their symbolic qualities and how they behaved in nature. If a plant grew in dry soil, it was considered drying. If it burned the tongue, it was warming. If it lived near water, it was moistening. It's medicine by vibe, and it dominated for centuries. The doctor moves on to a pot simmering near the hearth. The mixture inside is a murky, earthy brew with flecks of green and brown drifting like lost dreams. He tells you it's a cure-all tonic made from mint, sage, rosemary, and something he describes only as forest moss. You don't ask where he got the moss because you can already hear the ominous silence that would follow. He ladles some into a wooden cup and hands it to you. The steam smells sharp, almost minty with a hint of swamp. You sip it slowly, hoping it tastes better than it smells. It does not. He beams with pride, explaining that mint lightens the spirit, sage cleanses stagnant moisture, rosemary sharpens the mind, and the moss, well, the moss helps with earthly energies. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians genuinely believed in these energetic properties, or whether patients simply expected such explanations. Either way, you now have moss energy circulating through your humours, which is a sentence no modern medical chart will ever contain. You wander deeper into the room and spot a mortar and pestle dusted with golden powder. The doctor notices your curiosity and proudly announces its powdered marigold petals, used for treating fevers, rashes, and what he ambiguously calls hot sadness. This is your third reminder in 3 sections that medieval doctors categorized emotions like weather patterns. You skim a finger across the powder. It smells faintly floral with a hint of hay. He tells you marigolds were once considered strong enough to repel evil spirits. A quirky tidbit adds itself to your memory. Some households planted marigolds around their doors to keep wandering illnesses from drifting inside. Basically medieval Wi-Fi blocking, but for plague. On the next shelf you spot jars labelled with odd names: dragonwort, liverwort, eyebright, dead man's fingers. These sound like ingredients for a wizard's potion, not real medical treatments. But medieval doctors believed strongly in the doctrine of signatures, a theory claiming that a plant's appearance revealed its purpose. A plant shaped like a liver, good for the liver; a flower resembling an eye, great for eye issues; a fungus shaped vaguely like a hand, obviously cures hand problems. You want to ask what dead man's fingers cures, but you decide you're not emotionally prepared for the answer. The doctor picks up a cluster of herbs tied with twine, wormwood. He explains it's bitter, and bitterness fights moist diseases. You look at him, then look at the green bundle, then look back. You're already worried about your humours, so you don't argue. He offers you a piece to chew. You decline so quickly you nearly injure your other arm. A small cauldron sits in the corner, bubbling gently. The doctor tells you it's a concoction used to treat stomach ailments. The ingredients? Wine, honey, thyme, and, brace yourself, finely crushed eggshell. You blink. He clarifies that eggshell is drying, which is perfect for loose humours. In other words, your ancestors cured stomach problems with medieval Tums. Historians still debate whether eggshell remedies genuinely helped, or whether patients simply felt comforted by warm, sweetened wine. Honestly, you'd probably feel better too. You approach a jar filled with something pale and feathery. The doctor explains it's dried moss scraped from old stone walls, used to treat wounds, coughs, and even melancholy. You are suddenly very aware of how many moss-based treatments exist. You consider suggesting that maybe moss is just moss, but you value your safety and keep quiet. The doctor continues his tour, proudly displaying his collection like it's the culinary season finale of medieval medicine. He has sage for cleansing the mind, lavender for easing headaches, chamomile for calming nerves, garlic for warding off illness and maybe vampires, and a particularly questionable jar labelled snail water. You stare at it until he casually mentions that it's made from distilling live snails with herbs. You immediately and wholeheartedly decide that your current symptoms are not severe enough for snail water. He finishes by handing you a tiny satchel filled with dried herbs, his equivalent of a prescription. Inside are rosemary, mint, and a pinch of ground marigold. He instructs you to steep it in warm water, breathe in the steam, and drink it before bed. The warmth will soothe your humours, he promises, and help maintain the inner balance he worked so hard to restore. You nod, grateful the remedy doesn't involve anything leaking out of you this time. As you step outside the herb room, the lingering scent of mint and rosemary clings to your clothes. Medieval medicine may be strange, and often hilariously misguided, but you can't help but appreciate the quiet comfort of those fragrant herbs, even if half of them were chosen, because someone once thought they resembled a body part. You leave the herb chamber smelling like someone who fell into a medieval spice rack, only to be greeted by the doctor waiting with a star chart in one hand and a quill in the other. He waves you over with the urgency of someone who's just discovered an alignment between Mars and your sinuses. You slowly realise you're not done with tonight's tour of ancient medical logic. In fact, things are about to get celestial. Because in this world, astrology isn't a hobby, it's diagnosis. You follow him to a table positioned directly under a narrow window where a single beam of moonlight cuts across the room. The doctor dramatically rolls out a parchment covered in circles, lines, zodiac symbols, and something that looks suspiciously like a doodle of a goat. He's not checking your temperature anymore, he's checking your star sign, and apparently your humours aren't the only things misbehaving. Your planetary influences might be acting up too. Before you can protest, he asks for your birth date. You mumble something approximate. After all, medieval records aren't known for their precision, and he nods as if you've just confessed a profound secret. He begins calculating your natal influences, which is medieval doctor speak for, let me see what the heavens say about your spleen. A mainstream historical fact settles in. For centuries, medical astrology was a core part of university training. Students learned planetary movements as seriously as they learned anatomy. Doctors carried astrological calendars just as modern physicians carry stethoscopes. You feel a little stunned, imagining Oxford students cramming for exams on how Saturn affects your digestive humours. It's oddly charming, in a mildly terrifying way. The doctor points at the parchment. Mars is in a dominant position, he says solemnly. That explains your earlier feverish imbalance. You're about to argue that your feverish imbalance might have had something to do with bleeding into a bowl, but you hold your tongue. He continues. You show signs of heat rising from the liver. This is the 7th time he's blamed your liver today, so maybe it's personal. He draws a tiny symbol next to Aries. You see, the moon's position influences moisture, and tonight the moon sits in Taurus, which governs the throat. That's why your voice sounds a little tired. You blink. You hadn't spoken in 15 minutes, but apparently the stars have diagnosed you anyway. A quirky tidbit spices up the moment. Some medieval doctors refused to perform certain procedures unless the moon was in a safe house. For example, cutting into the arm while the moon was in Gemini was considered risky because Gemini governed the arms. So if you needed surgery and the moon wasn't feeling cooperative, you'd just wait. Days, weeks, months. It was cosmic procrastination. The doctor brings out a wooden instrument that looks like a cross between a compass and a torture device. It's actually an astrolabe, one of the most advanced tools of the medieval world. He holds it up to the window, aligning it with the moon. You stand there, trying not to sneeze, while he mutters calculations under his breath like an enchanted accountant. When he's satisfied, he scribbles something onto the parchment and taps the table. Your humours are affected by a cold influence from Saturn, he explains. This contributes to your sluggishness. You consider telling him you haven't had coffee in this century, but again, you politely decline. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians sincerely believed the planets directly caused illness, or if astrology was simply a convenient, socially accepted framework to organise symptoms. Either way, here you are, having your energy levels blamed on Saturn, a planet roughly 1 billion miles away, wearing rings made of ice and rock, minding its own business. The doctor shifts his parchment and begins consulting the zodiac man, a diagram used widely in medieval manuscripts. It shows a naked human figure with zodiac symbols mapped to body parts. Aries governs the head, Taurus the neck, Gemini the arms, Cancer the chest, all the way down to Pisces ruling the feet. You try not to stare too long at the drawing because it looks like someone based it on the memory of a human body. He points to Leo. Right now, your heart is influenced by solar energies, he says. You should avoid heavy meals tonight. Considering your last meal included moss water and a questionable brew, that won't be a problem. He then points to Virgo, governing the intestines, and warns you that too much walking could disturb the alignment. You interpret that as permission to sit down, which you happily do. As the doctor continues analysing your celestial chart, he notes that Jupiter's position suggests you might be prone to melancholic winds, a phrase so dramatic it sounds like the name of a medieval indie band. He recommends burning rosemary near your bed to counteract the planetary chill. Honestly, at this point, your room is going to smell like a Thanksgiving roast, but in a comforting way. He shifts topics abruptly. Your dreams last night, he says, were they troubled? You try to remember, but all you can think about is the bleeding bowl. He nods anyway, convinced your lack of memory is due to Mercury's influence over your mind. A fringe tidbit floats up. Some medieval doctors believed eclipses could trigger epidemics, madness, or insomnia. People even blamed comets for sudden outbreaks. Not germs, not sanitation issues, comets, space rocks. The universe apparently held grudges. The doctor circles back to your humours. Your blood is heated by Mars, he says. Your phlegm is cooled by the moon. Your bile is agitated by Mercury, and your black bile is stirred by Saturn. You realise your entire body is apparently having a planetary traffic jam. He assures you it's normal. You are not reassured. He hands you a small parchment rolled into a scroll. This is your astrological regimen, he explains. It includes instructions like, avoid fish during waning moons, do not nap during Mars hours, and drink warm mint water when Venus is ascendant. You want to ask when exactly Venus ascends, but the doctor is already packing away his charts with an air of cosmic finality. You step outside, blinking at the quiet darkness. The stars glitter overhead, serene and indifferent. You can't help but glance up and wonder, just for a moment, if Mars really does have something to say about your mood. Probably not. But in the medieval world, the heavens were a map, a clock, a medical chart, and a comforting mystery all in one. And maybe, just for tonight, that mystery is part of the charm. You barely have time to lower your gaze from the star-ruled sky before the doctor ushers you toward yet another chamber, this one lit by sunlight pouring through small stained glass windows. The colourful glow splashes across rows of glass flasks arranged neatly on shelves. They shimmer like captured rainbows, except the contents inside are decidedly less magical. Some are pale yellow, some almost gold, and one is a murky greenish colour you'd rather not talk about. The doctor clasps his hands together with the excitement of someone about to show you his prized gemstone collection. Unfortunately, these aren't gemstones. They're urine samples. You inhale slowly as the doctor lifts a flask with ceremonial reverence. Behold, he says proudly, the finest diagnostic tool available, uroscopy. The way he says it, you expect trumpets. Instead, you get the faint scent of ammonia and disappointment. He explains, quite enthusiastically, that physicians have been studying urine for centuries, long before microscopes, germ theory, or even basic understanding of anatomy. And to be fair, a mainstream historical fact backs him up. Medieval doctors considered urine inspection one of the most reliable medical tools available, and many diagnostic handbooks from the era include full-colour urine charts showing dozens of shades, bubbles, sediments, and textures. Think of it as medieval colour-coded health analysis, but exclusively for pee. The doctor picks up another flask and holds it toward the window. The sunlight strikes it dramatically, casting a glowing yellow puddle of colour across your shoes. This, he says, is the patient's inner world revealed. You resist the urge to take a strategic step backward. He hands you a pristine glass vessel and instructs you to visit the small wooden screen in the corner. You glance at it, then glance at him, then glance at your own dignity slowly packing its bags. But this is medieval medicine. You gave up dignity back in Section 2 when you let someone grade your blood by colour. You return with your sample, and the doctor beams like a proud teacher receiving homework. He raises the flask, tilts it slightly, studies the hue, sniffs. Oh no! Then swirls it thoughtfully as though he's sampling wine. You stand silently, counting every questionable life choice that led you here. He begins his analysis. The colour shows moderate heat, he announces. Not too much, but not balanced either. You're almost impressed by the confidence. He swirls again. The clarity suggests strong digestion. You haven't eaten anything solid since the moss incident, but sure, let's go with that. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some medieval manuals insisted that urine should be examined in a glass flask shaped exactly like the human bladder, because, for symbolic reasons, that made the reading harmonious. You look at your flask. Yep, shaped like a tiny, delicate bladder. 10 out of 10 for thematic consistency. The doctor holds your sample against a painted wheel hanging on the wall. On it are gradients of yellows, ambers and browns labelled with elegant script. Lemon, honey, gold, saffron, smoke, earth, and the ominous burnt. Your sample hovers somewhere between honey and saffron, which seems nice until the doctor murmurs, the saffron tint indicates a possible rise in yellow bile. Yet again with the bile. Your bile is having more story arcs than some TV characters. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians really believed every disease could be diagnosed through urine alone, or whether uroscopy was simply a comforting ritual, one that made patients feel like something clear and understandable was happening. After all, urine is visible. It's tangible. It's a piece of the body that behaves in predictable ways, mostly. And when the world was full of mysteries, plagues, fevers, mysterious winds, this little flask of warm yellow fluid offered something stable. The doctor now lowers your sample and examines the sediment, which has settled at the bottom like tiny pale grains. He taps the glass lightly. "This," he says gravely, "tells us your humours are beginning to calm after the bleeding." You consider the possibility that he's just making conversation, but no, he is fully committed. He points out that if the sediment were cloudier, you'd have moist obstruction. If it were redder, you'd have hot surplus. If it were floating at the top, you'd be dealing with ascending vapours. It's a good thing it's not green, because that, according to one fringe tidbit, indicated jealousy. Yes, jealousy. Apparently even your emotions left footprints in your pee. He gestures for you to smell it. You decline with the speed of a startled squirrel. Thankfully, this time he doesn't insist. Instead, he takes a long whiff himself and nods approvingly. "Normal," he says. You resist the urge to clap for his bravery. Then comes the texture test. He dips a tiny wooden stick into the sample, swirls once, and observes how the liquid drips. Healthy consistency, he notes. Not too thin, not too thick. You blink. You're not a doctor, but it seems extremely bold to judge anyone's hydration by drip aesthetic. He sets the flask down gently. Your constitution is warm and moist, he concludes, with a hint of imbalance in the yellow bile. You don't know what that means, but he delivers it with such authority, you nod like it's the most reasonable statement you've ever heard. He scribbles in his notebook, a diagnosis written in looping script. He adds a recommendation: drink herbal infusions, avoid hot spices, sleep with your head slightly elevated, and for reasons you don't quite understand, avoid gazing at bright colours tonight. Perhaps your humours are sensitive to bold decor. As the doctor moves to store your sample among the others, like a tiny golden trophy, you notice one neglected flask with dark reddish sediment. You ask what malady it represents. He answers solemnly, "A sign of great disturbance." When you press for details, he leans closer. It belonged to a patient who insisted his symptoms were caused by overeating cheese. He shakes his head sadly. Clearly the stars were to blame. And just like that, you realise self-awareness was not part of the medieval curriculum. You walk away from the urine chamber strangely relieved, not because any of this makes scientific sense, but because there's something almost cozy about how earnestly medieval doctors tried to decode the mysteries of the body. And in a world without tests, scans, or labs, a glowing golden flask of warm liquid felt like a small window into the truth, even if the truth was mostly guesswork. You step out of the uroscopy chamber with the dignity of someone who has just watched a man swirl their bodily fluids like a medieval sommelier. You're hoping, praying actually, that the next stop involves fewer jars and fewer opportunities for your doctor to say things like, "Your saffron hue concerns me." But instead of leading you to a quiet resting nook or even a room that smells less like a barnyard science fair, he guides you toward a long corridor lined with candles. Their flames flicker gently, throwing warm gold across the stone walls. At the end of the hall stands an arched doorway, draped with thick fabric embroidered in gold thread. The doctor pulls it aside and ushers you into a space that feels more like a chapel than an infirmary. The scent here is different. Less herbs, more incense. Faint chanting echoes from somewhere you can't quite see, and the air feels just a little heavy, like you've stepped into a place where the line between medicine and miracle gets blurry. "Welcome," the doctor murmurs, "to the Hall of Holy Remedies." You look around, your eyes adjusting to the dim light. Shelves crowd every wall, but instead of jars and plants, these shelves hold boxes, reliquaries, tiny shrines, carved wooden, cases, and small glass vials sealed with wax. Each one contains something sacred: fragments of bone, threads of cloth, dried petals from holy sites, tiny flasks of oil said to have been touched by saints. Some look ancient. Some look suspiciously like the doctor made them during lunch break. He motions you forward. "Medical science alone cannot heal every affliction," he says in a tone of rehearsed wisdom. Sometimes the body needs divine assistance. A mainstream historical fact floats into your thoughts. In medieval Europe, medicine and religion were not separate spheres. Physicians often worked alongside monks, and many healers believed illnesses had spiritual causes just as much as physical ones. Pilgrimages to relics were common prescriptions, and some medical texts included prayers right next to herbal recipes. To be healed was not just to fix the body, but to restore harmony between soul, spirit, and humours. The doctor leads you to the first reliquary. Inside is a pale fragment of bone, small as a seashell sealed in crystal. "A relic of St. Blas," he says reverently. "Protector against throat ailments." You swallow reflexively, and he nods with satisfaction. "Very good. The saint hears you." You want to explain you are just trying to wet your throat after the anxiety of the pea taste testing experience, but you decide against it. He gestures toward a small iron key tied with ribbon. This, he explains, was said to lock away fever demons. You're not entirely sure how a fever demon unlocks anything, but the logic checks out in medieval terms. A quirky tidbit emerges from memory. Some medieval communities believed illnesses were caused by invisible spirits or sins that needed to be driven out through rituals, relics, or, your favourite, loud noises. Yes, loud noises. Apparently scaring a fever makes it go away. You consider sneezing aggressively at your future symptoms just to test the theory. The doctor guides you to a tall wooden cabinet containing dozens of tiny vials. Holy oils, he says, each one blessed, each one infused with divine power. He selects one filled with pale gold liquid. This is for easing melancholy. You raise an eyebrow because if anything can cure melancholy, it's probably not a lukewarm oil dabbed behind your ears, but the doctor insists. He dips his finger into the vial, touches your forehead with a soft tap, and murmurs a short prayer. The oil smells faintly of wildflowers and something ancient, maybe beeswax, maybe faith. Historians still argue whether medieval people genuinely expected miracles from relics, or whether the rituals themselves offered psychological comfort. Faith works in mysterious ways, and the mind-body connection is powerful, even when wrapped in superstition. And honestly, standing here in this candlelit room, you feel a strange calm settling over you. Perhaps not divine intervention, but something gentler. The doctor draws your attention to a glass case containing a withered sprig of lavender tied with faded ribbon. This belonged to a pilgrim who claimed it cured her trembling fits, he says. She held it every night until her symptoms eased. You wonder if she simply found comfort in something familiar to hold. Then again, lavender does have calming properties, one of those delightful places where medieval belief accidentally aligned with real pharmacology. He moves on to something more unusual. A stone, smooth and round with a faint red stain. Touched to the cloak of a martyr, he explains solemnly. Used to treat bleeding wounds. You don't have the heart to tell him you're not interested in testing whether martyr stone beats moss water. Your eyes land on a box displaying a strip of coarse cloth. From the robe of a wandering monk, he says, used to soothe fevers. You give him a cautious nod, thinking of how fabric and touch, simple, human things, can comfort even without magical properties. Then comes the fringe tidbit, the kind that makes you question everything. He shows you a tiny relic labelled as the toenail of a saint. You stare. He waits proudly. You continue staring. He asks if you feel blessed. You tell him, gently, that you feel a lot of things, but you're unsure blessed makes the top 5. He doesn't mind. Medieval doctors loved mixing spiritual theory with physical treatment because it made illness feel less random. If your fever wasn't only caused by bad air, but also by an unhappy spirit or moral imbalance, then healing involved hope, and hope is powerful medicine, even today. The doctor finishes by offering you a small wooden bead on a red string. Wear this tonight, he instructs. It was blessed last summer and offers protection against wandering nightmares. You accept it, partly because it's polite, partly because you've seen enough today to believe nightmares are entirely possible. As you leave the chamber, you realize something surprising. While the cures may be strange, the intention behind them feels deeply human. People were scared of illness. They wanted meaning, comfort, control, and combining herbs and relics gave them all 3, science, spirituality, and a sense of hope. And on nights like this, wandering through candlelit halls and gently ridiculous remedies, you can almost understand the charm. You step out of the relic hall wearing your little blessed bead on its red string, feeling just a touch more protected, or at least stylish, than before. The doctor shuffles ahead, muttering excitedly as he leads you toward a narrow doorway. You can smell something long before you see it. A swirl of sharp spices, soft florals, sour tangs, and one unmistakable whiff of absolutely not. You pause. He beams. This can only mean one thing. You're entering the chamber of medicinal smells. The door creaks open, and you're immediately hit with a sensory wall so powerful it feels like a physical slap. Rows of bowls sit along the floor, each steaming, smoking, or fuming with a different aroma. Herbs, oils, resins, flowers, burnt feathers, fermented, something. Your eyes water instantly. The doctor inhales deeply with theatrical pleasure. Ah, he sighs, the true pharmacy of the nose. You try to breathe through your mouth but regret it instantly. Whatever that last bowl is, it has opinions. He steps forward, picking up a bundle of dried lavender tied neatly with twine. Smell, he commands. You do, and to your relief, it's actually pleasant, calming, gentle, like a good pillow in scent form. Lavender cools excess heat in the blood, he explains. It soothes restless spirits. A mainstream historical fact drifts in. Medieval physicians truly believed aromas could correct bodily imbalances, since scent was thought to travel directly to the brain and influence the humours. Honestly, if you've ever smelled freshly baked bread, you understand the logic. But before lavender can fully charm you, he grabs another bundle, rosemary scorched at the tips. Warming, invigorating, he says. You sniff and cough slightly. Very invigorating. Used for treating weakness of the limbs. You consider just doing push-ups instead, but he doesn't offer that option. Then he moves on to a small bowl filled with something that looks harmless. A pale, waxy resin, melting gently over flame. The scent that hits your nose is sweet, warm, and comforting. Frankincense, he announces, used to purify both rooms and patients. You remember hearing that frankincense was traded widely in the medieval world, prized for ceremonies and healing. Historians still argue whether its medical benefits were psychological, symbolic, or actually biochemical. You don't know, but the smell is doing good things for your mood. You stroll along the bowls until you reach the one that looks like a tiny swamp in crisis. The doctor stirs it with a stick. You take one whiff and nearly begin a new religion. Ah, he says proudly, the powerful scent of asafoetida. You back up quickly. Useful for treating cold diseases, he adds, as if that explains why your eyebrows are trying to leave your face. A quirky tidbit lands. Medieval people called asafoetida devil's dung, an accurate name, completely fair. He moves on, unbothered, and picks up a jar of dried rose petals. Pleasant smells draw good humours, he says. The body responds to beauty. You want to agree, but you're still recovering from devil's dung, so you just nod politely. Next, he shows you a tiny cloth pouch filled with cloves and cinnamon. He squeezes it gently so the warm, spicy scent fills the air. These protect the lungs, he says, also useful for warding off corruption in the air. And suddenly you remember something from your readings. During plague years, people carried pomanders, little scented spheres, to guard themselves against bad air. They believed sweet smells kept danger away. In a world without masks or antibiotics, scent became a kind of hopeful armour. Then the doctor presents something unexpected. A small clay cup filled with vinegar and herbs. He presses it under your nose. Vinegar revives the faint, he says. Considering today's adventures, you might need that soon. He dips a cloth into the vinegar and hands it to you. Keep this with you, in case of dangerous vapours. You don't want to ask exactly what counts as dangerous vapours, because based on this room, the answer might be everything. But the tour isn't over, not even close. He leads you to a corner where smoke drifts lazily from a small bronze censer. The scent is earthy and pungent. Burnt feathers, he explains casually. You blink. Used to shock the senses awake. You would prefer coffee. In another bowl, something sulphurous bubbles ominously. The doctor lifts the lid, and the smell hits you like a medieval punchline. Rotten eggs. Pure, unfiltered rotten eggs. A strong stimulus, he says, opens blocked humours. You consider leaving your humours blocked forever if this is the alternative. You take a careful step back, inhaling through your sleeve for safety. But the doctor simply moves on, presenting you with a small jar of mint paste. It smells crisp and cool. Mint clarifies the mind, he says, restores sharpness. You inhale gratefully, your mind sharpens. Or maybe it's just relieved to not be assaulted again. He concludes the tour with a bowl of crushed juniper berries simmering in warm water. The scent is bright, resinous, and oddly relaxing. Ideal for calming agitation, he explains. Inhaling juniper keeps the heart steady. You lean in closer, letting the softer aroma wash away the memory of burnt feathers and devil's dung. Historians still debate whether medieval doctors really believed scents alone could cure illnesses, or whether aromatics were simply part of a larger sensory ritual that comforted patients. And honestly, standing here, letting warm lavender and rosemary drift around you, you begin to understand. The human mind loves associations. Comforting smells soothe us, harsh smells shake us awake, and familiar scents make us feel safe. Even without the science, medieval doctors were onto something, but they also definitely swung for the fences with the rotten egg cure. As you leave the chamber of smells, the doctor gives you a small wax-sealed pouch. Open this when you feel unbalanced, he says. You don't have the courage to ask what's inside. You're half terrified it's a saffoetida, or worse, a surprise. Still, as the door closes behind you and the candlelit hallway welcomes you back, you can't help but smile. Medieval doctors may have followed some bizarre theories, but their remedies were built on a universal truth. Sometimes, healing starts with the senses, and with a comforting scent to steady the mind. Just, maybe not the rotten egg one. You follow the doctor down another hallway, this one warmer than the rest, as if the stones themselves have absorbed a century's worth of steam. Your clothes cling slightly to your skin. The air thickens, damp and heavy, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and hot water. You realize what's coming even before the doctor pushes open a creaking door and gestures you inside with a flourish. Welcome to the realm of heat, steam, and humble baths, a place where medieval physicians believed the cure to almost everything could be found in a tub, a cauldron, or an awkwardly timed sweat session. The room is filled with gentle fog. Wooden tubs line the walls, some already steaming, others covered with cloths to hold in the heat. A roaring fire blazes in the hearth, feeding warmth into the room like an enthusiastic dragon. The doctor inhales deeply, closing his eyes with bliss. "Ah," he says, "the true fountain of health." You're not sure if he means the tubs or the steam or the dragon-level fire hazard, but you nod politely. A mainstream historical fact floats comfortably into place. Bathing, sweating, and heat therapies were core components of medieval medicine inherited from ancient Greek and Roman traditions. Public bathhouses existed in many towns, and private baths, though expensive, were prized for their healing potential. Physicians prescribed warm baths for fevers, cold baths for swelling, herbal baths for mood disorders, and sweating sessions for everything from colds to excess moisture of the brain. You're almost afraid to ask what counts as brain moisture. The doctor leads you toward a tub filled with milky-looking water. You lean closer. It's hot, very hot. Steam rises in twisting ribbons. Floating on top are sprigs of rosemary, mint, and something that looks suspiciously like cabbage. A balancing bath, he explains. Good for humours disturbed by overthinking. You don't have the heart to tell him you've been overthinking since section 1. He dips his hand into the water, stirs it with reverence, then gestures for you to sit. You lower yourself slowly, expecting to be cooked alive like a medieval stew. But to your surprise, the heat relaxes your muscles instantly. The scent of mint rises in soft waves. You sink deeper, letting the tub swallow your fatigue. The doctor nods approvingly. Heat opens the pores, he says, allowing excess humours to escape. You don't remind him that humours don't actually evaporate. You're too busy enjoying this brief moment of comfort. He sits beside the tub on a wooden stool and begins to explain the logic behind the therapy. Cold illnesses require heat, he says. Heat illnesses require cooling. But to restore harmony after bleeding, he gestures to your bandaged arm, a gentle sweat is ideal. You realize you've been sweating steadily since you entered this sauna disguised as a room. A quirky tidbit bubbles up from your memory. In some towns, sweat houses were used like early saunas. People sat in tiny rooms filled with steam, while healers chanted prayers or waved herbs through the air to drive out sickness. You imagine the experience as part cleansing ritual, part spa day, part very sweaty meditation session. To enhance the therapy, the doctor picks up a ladle of hot water and pours it gently down your shoulders. This encourages the humours to flow smoothly, he says. You're beginning to think medieval medicine is secretly 80% about creative ways to justify bath time. He shows you another tub, this one cooler, filled with rose petals floating gently on the surface. For fevers, he explains, or for overheated tempers. You file that away for future arguments. Then he leads you to a third tub filled with thick, almost syrupy liquid tinted greenish brown. You pray silently that he doesn't ask you to get in. This, he announces with dramatic gravitas, is a medicinal broth for treating skin ailments. You lean closer. The smell is somewhere between stale tea, wet forest, and regret. Made from boiled nettles, barley water, and ground oats, he says proudly. You nod politely, thinking of all the breakfast foods that deserved better. Historians still argue whether these medical broths genuinely helped with skin conditions, or whether the soothing heat of the water did most of the work. Warm baths do relax the body after all, and oats, unexpectedly, have real anti-inflammatory properties. You kind of love that medieval doctors accidentally invented oatmeal skincare. The doctor continues the tour by dragging you toward a wooden bench surrounded by curtains. The sweating cloak, he says. Hanging from hooks are thick woolen blankets, each lined with herbs stitched into the seams. He drapes one over your shoulders. Instantly you feel like a bundled dumpling in a steaming basket. He closes the curtains around you, sealing in the heat. Breathe deeply, he instructs. Sweating releases corrupted moisture. You inhale. Rosemary. Thyme. Maybe a hint of sage. You start to feel like a well-seasoned roast. You sit there sweating, contemplating your life choices, while the doctor occasionally pokes his head through the curtain to check your progress. Excellent sweating, he says at one point. You're not sure how to respond to that. He tells you that sweat therapy was particularly popular among medieval elites, who believed it could ward off fevers, cleanse the spirit, and sometimes even sharpen the mind. A fringe tidbit makes you raise an eyebrow. Some medieval texts claim that sweating could release troubling dreams, as if nightmares were stored like moisture somewhere behind your ribs. You file that away as an interesting theory, but one you hope never to test. After several minutes, the doctor removes the cloak and hands you a cloth to wipe your forehead. Your humours are flowing more freely, he declares. You feel mostly dehydrated. He gives you a cup of warm herbal infusion that tastes faintly of grass and determination. As you step away from the sweating bench, the doctor shows you yet another therapeutic station, a large copper basin filled with steaming water and small stones. For the feet, he says, heat rises through the body. He encourages you to step in. You do, and the warmth seeps through you like a slow, comforting sigh. He smiles, explaining that foot baths were considered essential for rebalancing the mind and steam baths were often prescribed for melancholy. You realize something slowly, quietly, as the steam curls around you. Medieval medicine may have been filled with bizarre theories, strange ingredients, and questionable logic, but the comfort of heat, the soothing quality of warm water, the relaxing lull of steam, those sensations transcend time. Even without science, people found ways to soothe themselves, ways to feel cared for, and honestly, after devil's dung and relic toenails, this might be the high point. The doctor helps you out of the basin, wraps you in a thick linen cloth, and nods approvingly. Your humours are calm, he says. Your balance is restored, for now. You don't correct him. You're just grateful to stop sweating. You leave the steam chamber feeling like a gently simmered vegetable, soft, warm, and slightly unsure whether you're supposed to be healing or becoming soup. The doctor seems delighted with your current softened state, as though you're now perfectly primed for whatever comes next. And what comes next, judging by the earthy smell drifting from the adjacent room, involves creatures, or parts of creatures, or substances that once belonged to creatures but now qualify as medieval medicine. Welcome to the realm of animal-based remedies, a place where logic takes a nap and creativity runs absolutely wild. The next chamber is dimly lit, the air filled with the scent of hay, fat, feathers, and something faintly metallic. The doctor motions you closer with the dramatic flourish of someone revealing a treasure trove. On shelves lining the walls are jars and bundles labelled with names that make you squint. powdered hoof, rendered boar fat, honeyed ant paste, and one very mysterious jar simply named night oil. You make a mental note not to ask what's inside. Animals, the doctor begins proudly, provide some of our most powerful cures. He says this while holding a jar that contains what looks like a handful of crushed beetles. You nod slowly, because that's easier than screaming. A mainstream historical fact grounds the moment. Many medieval remedies relied on animal products: fat, bone, organs, horn, milk, eggs, insects, because animals were seen as repositories of powerful natural energies. Their strength, warmth, vitality, or speed were believed to transfer through medicinal mixtures. If you ate a strong animal, maybe you'd become strong. If you applied a warm fat to your chest, maybe your lungs would warm too. It's simple, symbolic medicine, and occasionally nightmare fuel. The doctor lifts a clay pot and opens it carefully. Inside is a creamy, waxy substance tinted slightly yellow. Pig fat, he says, mixed with herbs. A salve for chest congestion. He dips 2 fingers in and demonstrates how to smear it across the ribs in gentle circular motions. You politely decline becoming a pig fat canvas, so he simply pats your shoulder and resumes the tour. Next, he picks up a brittle-looking hoof. Powdered and mixed with wine, he explains. Excellent for stopping nosebleeds. You imagine someone grate shredding hooves over their wine cup like medieval parmesan and try not to gag. Then he presents something that makes your face twitch involuntarily. A small glass vial filled with tiny reddish granules. Ants, he declares, crushed and dried, used to restore vigor. You stare at him. He nods enthusiastically. You stare harder. He insists that ants store energy from the earth and therefore boost the body's natural strength. Historians still argue whether these remedies were meant literally or symbolically, but the fact remains, someone had to collect ants for this. Thousands of them. It was somebody's job. He moves on to something stranger still, a bundle of hair tied neatly with twine. Burnt hair, he explains, mixed into salves to treat skin irritations. You politely suggest that burnt hair might cause skin irritations, but he waves dismissively. Only if misused. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some medieval remedies used live frogs, pressed gently onto swollen areas to draw out inflammation. You glance around nervously, half expecting to see a frog spa corner. Thankfully, no amphibians greet you. Instead, he walks over to a table holding several eggs. Eggs, he says, lifting one with ceremony, are among the finest balancing ingredients. He cracks one into a bowl, separates the yolk and white with practiced ease, and tells you yolk moistens, while egg white dries. He demonstrates by mixing egg white with ground herbs to create a paste for skin ailments. You think wistfully of breakfast. Then comes the moment you feared. He reaches for a small wooden box carved with an elegant pattern. Inside is something dark, resinous, and slightly shiny. Badger fat, he announces, applied to joints to ease stiffness. He offers you a dab on your fingers to feel the texture. You do not want to feel the texture. You have never wanted anything less. But he waits patiently, so you give in. It feels like cold butter that has strong opinions. You wipe your hand discreetly on your sleeve. The doctor then lifts a narrow jar filled with long, translucent threads. Sheep intestines, he says, dried and used for binding wounds. You decide it's time to emotionally detach from your own body. Historians still debate whether these animal remedies genuinely helped, or if the heating, massaging, or general care they involved provided the real benefit. In many cases, fat-based salves did help moisturize the skin, protect wounds, or keep muscles warm. But powdered frog bones, the jury is out. Speaking of bones, he now picks up a bundle of fine, pale powder. Ground bone, he explains. Good for strengthening the spine. You ask calmly if it matters which animal the bone comes from. He shrugs. Not as long as the animal was strong in life, which seems like a very optimistic assumption about old cows. He guides you to a final table, this one filled with small cloth bags tied tight. He opens one, revealing a dark, earthy material. Beaver castoreum, he says softly, with the seriousness of someone revealing forbidden treasure. Used to treat headaches, hysteria, and fainting spells. You blink. Castoreum is a secretion produced near the beaver's tail. This is the moment your sleep-deprived brain quietly leaves the room to lie face down somewhere safe. The doctor, however, is very proud. The beaver is a wise creature, he explains. Its energies calm the troubled mind. You consider telling him that your mind is troubled because of the beaver secretion, but he already moves on. He hands you a tiny vial filled with pale powder. Crushed snail shells, he says, for strengthening the stomach. You think it's adorable how medieval medicine imagines the stomach as a small snail house. Finally, he gestures toward a cauldron simmering with something rich and dark. The smell is meaty, smoky, and oddly comforting. Bone broth, he says, good for warmth, strength, recovery. And suddenly, amazingly, you realize this is the one medieval animal remedy that still thrives today. You nod appreciatively. Yes, you say. That one makes sense. He looks delighted. As the tour ends, he hands you a small pot of herbal-infused lanolin. Sheep's wool oil, he says. Rub it on your temples before sleep. It soothes anxiety. You take it gently, pleasantly surprised. It actually smells nice. And as you leave the animal remedy room, you can't help but admire the medieval determination to use every part of every creature in the name of healing. Some cures are questionable, some repulsive, some strangely logical, but all are born from people trying desperately to understand the body with the tools they had. You just hope your next cure doesn't involve ants. You barely have time to recover from the beaver secretion incident before the doctor sweeps you toward yet another chamber. This one dim, hushed, and filled with the soft hum of whispered words. Candles line the walls, their flames steady and warm, casting gentle halos onto the carved wooden beams overhead. It feels different from the previous rooms. Not scientific, not herbal, not even bodily. This place is quieter, almost tender, as if the very air has been instructed to speak softly. This, the doctor whispers, is where we keep the charm books and whispered spells. You blink. Spells. You were barely coping with snail powder and pig fat salves, and now you're being introduced to the medieval ASMR department. He leads you to a long table covered in manuscripts. Some are neatly bound, others are frayed at the edges, their pages yellowed and soft from countless hands. On the parchment are drawings, strange sigils, handwritten chants in looping script, and recipes that blend prayer with potion making. You run a finger along the edge of one book. The vellum is smooth, warm, lived in. A mainstream historical fact rises gently to the surface. Medieval medicine often blended folk traditions and Christian ritual. Physicians learned anatomy and herb lore at universities, but many also consulted charm books, prayer manuscripts, and whispered incantations inherited through oral tradition. Healing wasn't just about humours, it was about hope, ritual, and the comforting rhythm of words passed down through generations. The doctor opens one of the charm books and shows you a page adorned with symbols, a circle drawn around a cross, small stars and phrases written in Latin. This charm, he says, was used to calm fevers. It is spoken softly over the patient's forehead. He demonstrates. His voice drops to a faint murmur, each syllable curling through the air like smoke. It's almost soothing, in a slightly spooky way. He closes the book, takes your hand, and places it over your chest. Breath, he instructs. You inhale. Good. Now listen. He moves behind you and whispers an old healing charm in a language you can't identify. Maybe Latin, maybe Old French, maybe a blend of both. His voice is low, rhythmic, gentle. You feel oddly calmer, even though you have no idea what he just said. That's the thing with whispered charms. They're half therapy, half mystique. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Medieval people sometimes used charms written on bread. Yes, literal bread. Then ate the bread to absorb the healing words. You discreetly hope he doesn't offer you enchanted carbs tonight. The doctor gestures toward a small wooden chest filled with amulets, simple ones made from twine, carved wood, or tiny stones inscribed with patterns. He lifts a pale river stone etched with a spiral. For easing nightmares, he says, you place it under your pillow. You wonder how many medieval pillows were stuffed with pebbles, in the name of good sleep. He shows you another charm, a piece of parchment wrapped tightly with red thread. He handles it carefully. This one is tied around the waist, he says. It protects against stomach trouble. You almost laugh. Modern medicine uses probiotics. Medieval medicine uses belt accessories. Historians still argue whether physicians truly believed in the power of charms, or simply used them because patients expected rituals. Many charm texts survive because monks copied them alongside their medical manuscripts, seeing no contradiction in blending prayer with treatment. For medieval people, the boundaries between physical and spiritual healing were paper-thin. The doctor now brings out a particularly elaborate charm, an iron key tied with a small feather and a snippet of wool. This, he says proudly, is the charm of peaceful heart. You raise an eyebrow. Useful for those troubled with restlessness, sorrow, or unwanted thoughts. You consider asking if it also works for people who've been forced to inhale a safuetida earlier today. He hands it to you. The key is cool and heavy in your palm. The feather brushes softly across your wrist. It's absurd and sweet at the same time, like wearing good luck disguised as medieval household items. Next, he shows you an incantation used specifically for headaches. He recites part of it softly, a plea to banish the wandering ache from the head, calling on angels, herbs, and sometimes even metals to restore balance. You decide not to question why headaches wander. You move to another book where the pages are crammed with tiny script. He points out a charm written for childbirth, a mix of prayer, herbal salves, and whispered encouragement. Another charm is for snakebite, another for toothache, and one particularly aggressive-looking one for warding off evil stares. You stare at the illustration, two eyes drawn with sharp eyebrows, and decide medieval people feared side-eye as much as plagues. The doctor now lifts a delicate chain with a tiny wooden disc attached. A whispering charm, he says. You speak your hope into it. He holds it toward you expectantly. You think for a moment, then whisper something small and personal. Maybe that your humours stay quiet for the rest of the night. He smiles and nods as if you've performed the ritual perfectly. A fringe tidbit breezes through your mind. Some medieval spells required timing, midnight for fever charms, sunrise for protection, and even specific moon phases for stubborn ailments. Medieval medicine loved a good deadline. The doctor concludes by offering you a short chant written neatly on parchment. Recite this before bed, he says. It smooths the dreams. The words are simple, melodic, and surprisingly peaceful. You imagine medieval patients lying in dark wooden rooms, candles flickering low, whispering these same words to steady their breath and calm their fears. Leaving the chamber, you feel something unexpected. Not belief, exactly. Not in the literal power of charms, but a gentle appreciation. Words have power, rituals soothe, and when illness strikes, sometimes the softest voice in the room is the one that helps the most, even if that voice occasionally suggests wearing a feather-key belt charm for stomach problems. The doctor leads you out of the whispering chamber with the same proud gait as someone escorting a very delicate, very bewildered celebrity. You've survived charms, animal remedies, and baths that nearly slow-cooked you, so surely, the next room will be calmer, gentler, less alarming, and for once, your optimism pays off. He pushes open a door, and you're greeted by warm sunlight streaming over rows of green leaves and soft soil. The air smells alive, earthy, fresh, bright. Birds chirp somewhere above the rafters, and a gentle breeze drifts across your face. You step out onto a small stone path winding through a lively kitchen garden, and immediately understand why medieval people believed plants could fix almost anything. Even your humours perk up. This, the doctor says with a satisfied sigh, is the heart of the household, the place where healing begins. For the first time all day, you relax. No jars of questionable fluids, no bowls of burning feathers, just plants, actual plants that look like they belong in food, not potions. A mainstream historical fact floats into your thoughts. Kitchen gardens were critical to medieval life, serving both culinary and medicinal needs. Families kept plots filled with herbs, vegetables, and fruit trees because professional medical help was expensive and unreliable. Most households relied on plant remedies long before seeing a doctor, if they ever saw one at all. The doctor leads you first to a patch of onions. They look innocent enough, but he kneels reverently beside them. Onions draw out bad humours, he says. Cut them, smell them, eat them. They cleanse the body in many ways. You nod, remembering that modern science actually agrees onions have antimicrobial properties. Medieval medicine occasionally stumbled into accuracy by sheer enthusiasm. He hands you a freshly cut onion. You sniff it. It smells like dinner. He nods as if you've just confirmed a diagnosis. Good, he says. Your humours respond well. Next, he guides you to a cluster of leeks standing tall and regal. These treat throat ailments, he explains. Boil them with honey. You imagine sipping leek honey tea and feel deeply conflicted. But he continues with enthusiasm. Leeks warm the chest and soften harsh winds of the lungs. You're too polite to inform him that your lungs do not, in fact, experience winds. Nearby, a bed of radishes glows ruby red under the sunlight. He plucks one and hands it to you. Bitter, he warns. You take a bite. He watches your face, delighted with your suffering. Excellent, he says. Bitter flavours. Reduce excessive moisture. You're fairly sure radishes reduce excessive joy, but you hold your tongue. A quirky tidbit emerges. Medieval people believed radishes could cure bloating, headaches, and even melancholy, because their sharp, biting flavour was thought to chase sluggish humours out of hiding. Imagine sadness packing its bags because a radish yelled at it. The doctor then stops beside a patch of parsley that looks perfectly harmless. A powerful herb, he says darkly, as if introducing a criminal mastermind. Stirs the inner heat. He plucks a handful and crushes it between his fingers, releasing a bright, peppery aroma. It's delightful. He hands you a leaf. You chew it, and suddenly your mouth feels like it's doing medieval cardio. He nods approvingly. Strengthens digestion. Awakens the spirit. You walk deeper into the garden, following him through rows of herbs you actually recognize. Mint, sage, thyme, oregano. These feel almost friendly after snail powder and beaver glands. He kneels beside a sage plant, brushing its soft velvety leaves. Sage restores memory, he says, good for cloudy thoughts. You inhale its warm, earthy scent and immediately think of roast chicken. He notices your pleasant expression and beams, convinced the sage is doing its job. Historians still argue whether medieval people believed herbs worked because of their taste, smell, or symbolic ties. But one truth remains. Herbs were the backbone of common medicine, and people trusted them because they were accessible, familiar, and often genuinely helpful. He then gestures towards something more unusual. A clump of plantain leaves. Broad, green, slightly shiny. This, he says, heals wounds. He crushes a leaf against a stone, creating a simple poultice. Apply this to cuts. You nod, remembering plantain is still used in folk remedies today. For once, medieval medicine feels downright modern. He moves to a corner of the garden where wild-looking nettles sway in the breeze. A prickly plant, but powerful, he says, used to treat joint pain. You ask timidly whether one must be stung first. He smirks. Only a little. You decide to pretend nettles don't exist. Then he shows you chamomile, delicate white flowers with gentle yellow centres. For sleep, for calm, for easing sorrow. You lean down to smell the blossoms. The aroma is soft, soothing, like the world finally exhaling. You close your eyes for a moment. The doctor nods approvingly. Your spirit softens, he says. Chamomile quiets troubled dreams. You briefly wish he'd given you chamomile instead of devil's dung earlier. A fringe tidbit drifts in. Medieval people sometimes placed chamomile under pillows to help children sleep, believing its gentle scent carried protective magic. You imagine children tucked in with small bouquets and smile. The doctor leads you next to a rosemary bush. The scent hits you instantly. Sharp, woodsy, energizing. Rosemary is for remembrance, he says, and for warming cold humours. He plucks a sprig and places it behind your ear. You feel slightly ridiculous, slightly fancy, and slightly convinced you're now seasoned like a roast. He directs you toward the final corner of the garden, a small bed of fennel. For digestion, he says, and courage. He hands you a fennel seed. You chew it. Sweet, bright, aromatic. He watches you closely. See, he says, already you grow braver. You do feel braver, though perhaps not enough to face another jar of ant powder. Before you leave, the doctor hands you a small woven basket filled with leaves and stems, mint, sage, chamomile, and a few sprigs of parsley. A night remedy, he says gently. Steep it in warm water, drink before sleep. It quiets the winds inside. You don't know if winds inside need quieting, but you accept the basket graciously. As you walk away from the garden, sunlight warming your shoulders, you feel something shift. Medieval medicine might be chaotic, odd, and occasionally terrifying, but in this little patch of earth, Surrounded by honest green life and good sense, you understand how healing begins in small, simple things, in leaves and soil, in warmth and scent, in rituals passed down by hands that care deeply. And for the first time tonight you think, maybe your humours really are calming down. You're barely out of the peaceful kitchen garden, still carrying your little basket of herbs, still smelling faintly of crushed rosemary, when the doctor suddenly stops, turns on his heel, and gives you the kind of smile that says, "The break is over, it's time to get weird again." You brace yourself. He gestures toward a wooden door with a carved symbol you don't recognise. It looks like a circle with squiggly lines, possibly representing water, or snakes, or the general chaos of medieval logic. He pushes the door open, and what greets you inside is a room dimly lit, humid, and oddly wiggly. You hear faint sloshing. You hear soft plops. You hear something that sounds like a tiny kiss. The doctor steps inside proudly and declares, "Welcome to the leech house." Your soul leaves your body for a moment. The room contains rows of clay jars, each filled with murky water. Some jars have corks, others have cloth covers tied down with string, and a few have air holes punched into the tops. You step closer, cautiously, and realize with existential dread that little black shapes wiggle inside them like slimy punctuation marks. "Leeches," the doctor says, with the same pride someone might use to say homemade cookies. He lifts one of the jars and swirls it gently. A small cluster of leeches squiggles to the surface, their glossy bodies rippling with unsettling enthusiasm. You reconsider every decision that led you into this room. The doctor doesn't notice your internal panic. He's too busy admiring the leeches like they're his beloved pets. A mainstream historical fact slithers into your mind. Leeches were among the most widely used medical tools for centuries, especially during the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Physicians believed leeches could remove bad blood, calm overheated humours, and draw poisonous influences out of the body. It wasn't just quackery. Leeches actually can help reduce blood pressure and encourage circulation, though medieval doctors used them for nearly everything: headaches, fevers, gout, melancholy, swollen joints, and occasionally excess enthusiasm, which seems like a very targeted insult. The doctor opens a jar and reaches inside without flinching. He lifts a leech between finger and thumb. It wriggles vigorously, expressing its displeasure. "This one," he says proudly, "is strong." You take an involuntary step backward. He steps forward. You step back again. "No need for fear," he assures you. "Leeches sense imbalanced blood." That does not reassure you. He gestures for you to sit on a small stool beside a wooden table. The top is stained slightly darker in circular patches, presumably leech footprints or leech aftermath. You do not want to dwell on it. He begins the demonstration. "The leech seeks heat," he explains. "It draws out the excess, leaving the body cooled and balanced." Historians still argue whether medieval doctors believed leeches had supernatural properties, or simply trusted them because they were efficient at making patients bleed slower and more politely. Either way, leeches had a full and thriving medical career. The doctor moves your sleeve up slightly, your other arm thankfully, and holds the leech near your skin. It wiggles with interest, its tiny mouth reaching toward you like a medieval vacuum cleaner. You make a sound that isn't quite a word but conveys your feelings perfectly. The doctor laughs, gently, not mockingly. "Don't worry, they release a numbing salve when they bite. You will barely feel it." He pauses. "Much less painful than knives and bowls." You suppose that's technically true, but still. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Leeches were so valuable in medieval Europe that entire guilds formed around their harvesting. Some people made a living wading into ponds with bare legs, waiting for leeches to attach so they could pluck them off and sell them. Yes, medieval biology involved a lot of screaming. The doctor finally takes pity on you and decides not to place the leech on your skin after all. Instead, he sets it gently back into its jar, where it somersaults with relief. You make a mental note to be nicer to leeches from now on. They've been through enough. He shows you another variety, slightly larger, slightly browner, and significantly more judgmental looking. "These are Hungarian leeches," he says dramatically. "Very effective. You don't know what makes a leech Hungarian, but the way it stares at you suggests it first drinks your blood, then critiques your life choices." Beside the jars lies a collection of instruments for removing leeches, small spatulas, fine salt, and vinegar. Salt forces them to release, he explains. Never pull them off. You nod, because this is exactly the kind of advice you hope never to need. He now demonstrates the proper leech session, which thankfully involves a wooden model arm instead of your own. He places several leeches along the veins, showing how they align instinctively, their little bodies pulsing. We use as many as needed, he says. 3 for minor fevers, 7 for humoral storms. Humoral storms. That might be your favourite medieval term so far. Historians still debate whether leeches were overused or simply the most reliable tool physicians had, but either way they were beloved. Too beloved. At one point in the 1800s, people used so many leeches that natural populations almost collapsed. Medieval doctors would have been horrified. Those little squiggles were their bread and butter. The doctor hands you a small wooden box filled with dried leech powder. You blink. He nods. Used in salves, he explains. Ground leech restores strength. You close the box quietly. He gives you one last piece of advice. If ever your humours heat too greatly, trust the leech. It is nature's physician. You bow your head respectfully toward the jars, mostly out of gratitude that none of their occupants are currently attached to you. As you step out into the fresh air of the corridor, you take the deepest breath you've taken all night. No slime, no wiggling, no tiny mouths. You survived the leech house. Somewhere behind you, a soft plop echoes in a jar, and you walk on, proud, relieved, and extremely determined never to complain about chamomile again. You leave the leech room with the quiet dignity of someone who has stared into the cold, glossy eyes of a slimy creature and politely said, "No thank you, not today." The doctor pats your shoulder as if proud you didn't faint, then guides you down a gently curving corridor. The farther you go, the more the atmosphere shifts. Less clinical, more homey. Warm lamplight spills across the walls. You catch a faint smell of baking bread. Someone is humming. For the first time in hours, you feel safe. The doctor gestures ahead. "Now," he says softly, "you will meet the healers who work outside the scholars' halls, the ones the people trust most." You arrive at a wooden door slightly ajar. Inside, the glow of a hearth flickers warmly. A low table sits in the centre, covered in bundles of herbs, bits of cloth, wooden bowls and tools that look suspiciously like they were designed for both healing and cooking. And standing behind the table is a figure with sleeves rolled up, a braid hanging over one shoulder, and the calm confidence of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. This, the doctor says with respect, is a wise woman. She looks up, wipes her hands, and nods at you with a smile that could soothe a thunderstorm. No star charts, no jars of wiggly creatures, no bone-labelled drawers, just a person whose presence feels like warm tea. A mainstream historical fact drifts into view. Folk doctors, midwives, herbalists, and wise women were the backbone of community healthcare in medieval Europe. They weren't university trained, but they were experienced, trusted, practical. They treated childbirth, wounds, fevers, coughs, aches, and broken spirits with remedies learned through generations. And while some scholars mocked them, others quietly learned from them, borrowing cures, copying recipes, pretending they invented things they clearly didn't. The doctor clears his throat. She knows many remedies, he says, but some are unconventional. You've heard that before, but for once unconventional seems promising. The wise woman motions for you to sit by the fire. The warmth washes over you, gentle and steady. She hands you a small clay cup filled with a steaming mixture that smells like mint, honey, and maybe something secret. You take a sip. Sweet, soothing. Nothing wiggles. A miracle. She begins explaining her approach in a calm voice. People's ailments speak differently, she says. Not all sickness comes from humours or stars. Some comes from cold nights, or worry, or lonely hearts, or a house without light. You watch the doctor's face as she talks. He nods slowly as if embarrassed he never put it that simply. She pulls a small pouch from her apron and opens it. Inside are crushed dried flowers. Violet, calendula, elderflower. She holds them out. These soothe heat of the skin, she says. You mix them with warm water and lay them across the brow. You inhale the floral scent and instantly agree. Then she shows you something stranger. A small wooden charm carved into the shape of a spiral. This, she says, calms children who fear the night. She spins it lightly between her fingers. It catches the firelight, reflecting warm glints. Fear is not cured by bleeding, she says gently, her eyes flicking toward the doctor. It is cured by comfort. He clears his throat politely. A quirky tidbit dances into memory. Many medieval communities believed wise women could draw out sickness with their hands, moving them slowly over the body to guide out pain. It sounds mystical, but it's not so different from massage or simple human touch. Things known today to reduce anxiety and help healing. The wise woman demonstrates this, waving her hands over your arm in slow arcs. It's oddly relaxing. The doctor clears his throat again. She then shows you a bowl filled with something dark and sticky. Honey and vinegar, she says, and for sore throats, help swallow pain. You nod, thinking of how modern cough syrups basically taste the same but cost 10 times more. She pulls down a jar of something that looks like golden syrup. Elderberry, she says, boiled with cinnamon, keeps winter sickness away. You inhale. It smells wonderful. She pours you a tiny spoonful. It tastes even better. You glance at the doctor, silently wondering why he didn't start the night with this. The wise woman moves briskly, showing you a series of simple, practical remedies. Her compresses made of warm cloth soaked in herb tea, sleep draughts of chamomile and poppy seed, salves of beeswax and lavender oil, poultices made from mashed root vegetables, warming foot baths with thyme, little knitted bags filled with mint to place on the chest. And with each remedy, she tells a small story. How a village child recovered from cough, how a merchant's headaches faded, how a mother regained strength after childbirth. Each story is gentle, grounded, human. Historians still argue whether wise women were unfairly maligned by male physicians, or whether their cures were simply more comforting. Sometimes they were accused of witchcraft, sometimes praised as miracles. But one thing is clear. Their methods often worked because they treated the person, not the disease. They listened. They soothed. They cared. The doctor shifts beside you, trying to maintain authority while clearly absorbing every detail like a freshman in a masterclass he didn't sign up for. The wise woman gives him a knowing look, the kind that says, "You're trying your best, dear, but let the grown-up handle this one." Finally, she hands you a small cloth sachet tied with twine. Inside, you smell chamomile, mint, sage, and something sweet. "For sleep," she says. "Place it near your pillow. It keeps troubling thoughts away." You nod gratefully. She leans closer. "Your humours," she whispers, "will calm on their own if the heart settles. First." The doctor pretends he didn't hear that. As you stand to leave, the wise woman gives your hand a warm squeeze. "Remember," she says, "not every cure is in the books." And as you step back into the hallway, you realise something quietly profound. After a night of bleeding bowls, urine wheels, relic toenails and leeches, the simplest remedies, warmth, kindness, herbs, and a listening ear, feel like the most powerful medicine of all. You leave the wise woman's warm, herb-scented haven feeling almost stabilised, emotionally, physically, spiritually, humourly. But the medieval medical roller coaster has no brakes, and the doctor seems energised again, as if he borrowed some of her calm and transformed it into ambition. His steps quicken, his eyes gleam with purpose. You should worry. He leads you down a narrow stone staircase. The air cools, the smell changes, less bread and mint, more iron and smoke. The corridor opens into a long chamber lit by blazing torches, and the metallic clinking echoing through the space tells you immediately, this is the danger zone. The doctor spreads his arms dramatically. "Welcome," he announces with theatrical pride, "to the surgery room." You freeze. He beams. The room looks like the medieval version of a mechanic's workshop. Tables cluttered with saws, needles, hooks, clamps, knives, and tools of uncertain purpose gleam under the flickering firelight. Some appear freshly cleaned. Others appear not. Bundles of linen, pots of boiling water, jars of thick ointments, and bowls filled with herbs sit around the edges like supportive side characters, trying their best to distract from the horror. "This," the doctor says, patting a thick wooden table, "is where we mend the body with courage." You look at the table. It looks like it has seen things. Courage feels like a very fragile requirement. A mainstream historical fact enters quietly. Medieval surgery existed, real, practical, surprisingly skilled in some areas. Surgeons could reset broken bones, stitch wounds, treat abscesses, remove arrowheads, and even perform cataract surgeries. Yes, really. But without anesthesia, without germ theory, without antibiotics, everything was done quickly, bravely, and with a tolerance for pain that modern humans simply do not possess. The doctor picks up a long metal needle. "We use this to sew the flesh," he says. You stare at it. It looks like something used to repair sails on ships. "For wounds," he continues casually, "we stitch with linen thread dipped in wine. You hope the wine is for sterilization. You strongly suspect the wine is for the patient." He shows you a small pot of thick, dark paste that smells like resin and smoke. "This is wound salve," he explains. "Pitch, beeswax, herbs, seals the skin. You imagine having burning glue smeared on an open wound and feel a quiet internal scream. Then he introduces you to the bone saw. You blink. He lifts it proudly. "Sometimes," he says, "a limb must be saved by removing a part of it." You take a slow step backward, but before panic devours your soul, he clarifies, "Not today, you need only observe." You exhale so dramatically you nearly faint. He walks over to a wooden cabinet and opens it, revealing models, wax limbs constructed for teaching. Some have cuts, others have fractures. One has a large arrow sticking out. He picks up the arrow model. "Battlefield injuries," he explains. "Very common." You nod, relieved he's using props. He demonstrates how to remove the arrow by pushing it through instead of pulling it out, explaining that barbs cause tearing when pulled backward. This is one of those unsettling moments when medieval logic aligns uncomfortably well with modern science. He shows you how to splint a broken leg, using wooden boards, linen strips, and tightly packed herbs to reduce swelling. He binds the model carefully, speaking with the patience of a craftsman. And for a moment you glimpse the skill beneath the superstition. Real knowledge passed down through apprenticeships and battlefield necessity. But then he lifts another tool, a long iron cautery rod with a handle. The end is darkened from heat. Your stomach drops. "We use this to stop bleeding," he says, "or close wounds." You blink again. He clarifies, "We heat it in the fire and apply it." This is how you learn that medieval cauterization is exactly as terrifying as it sounds. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some surgeons believe the smell of burning flesh actually carried away harmful vapors. You cannot unhear this. The doctor senses your alarm and shifts to something lighter, trepanning. Which would be great, except trepanning means drilling a hole in the skull. He pulls out a small hand drill with a rounded tip. "For head injuries," he says cheerfully, "releases bad pressure." One of the wax models has a neat little circle removed from its scalp. You stare at it, trying very hard not to think about your own skull pressure. Historians still argue whether medieval trepanning was used more for physical trauma or spiritual concerns. Some believed holes in the skull allowed evil winds or spirits to escape. Others used it to relieve swelling from injuries. In many cases, shockingly, people survived. The doctor puts the drill away gently and moves to his next demonstration, suturing techniques. He threads a needle and begins sewing through soft cloth stretched across a frame. "A tidy stitch prevents corruption," he explains. "A loose one invites trouble." You think about the wise woman's soft hands and feel grateful surgery wasn't her main hobby. He ends by showing you a jar of antiseptic. Well, the medieval version of antiseptic. "Wine," he says, swirling it proudly. "Cleans wounds, prevents rot." He's not wrong. Alcohol does kill bacteria. It's one of those lovely moments when medieval logic accidentally hits a scientific bullseye. Then he shows you honey. Golden, thick, beautiful. Used on wounds to keep them clean, he explains. Prevents corruption. You remember that honey is naturally antibacterial. You forgive him slightly for the cautery rod. He steps back, tools arrayed before him, and speaks softly. "Surgery is not gentle work," he says. "But when someone suffers, we do what we must." For a moment the room feels heavy. Not frightening, honest. Medieval surgeons weren't butchers. They were craftspeople working with impossible limitations, mending what they could and praying over the rest. You step out of the surgery chamber grateful for your intact limbs and undrilled skull. And maybe, just a tiny bit, in awe. Because behind all the bizarre cures, strange theories, and alarming instruments, Medieval doctors and surgeons were trying, earnestly, bravely, sometimes wildly incorrectly, but always with hope. And tonight, so far, you've kept every limb and humour where they belong. A true victory. You leave the surgery chamber with every limb still attached, and your skull blessedly undrilled, thinking that surely the worst is behind you. The doctor, however, has the excited gait of someone who absolutely believes the night's strangest moment is still ahead. You consider fleeing. You do not flee. Instead, you follow him down a stone corridor growing steadily darker. A cold draught curls along the walls. The air changes, less earthy, less herbal, more tense. You hear muffled voices, hurried footsteps, the creak of doors shutting in haste. The doctor turns to you with a grave expression. "It is time," he says softly, "for the plague playbook." Your stomach sinks. He pushes open a heavy wooden door and you enter a large chamber filled with objects that look like props from a particularly surreal nightmare. Dried herbs bundled into knots, wax tablets covered in astrological markings, strange masks hanging on pegs, long rods, stacks of herbal mixtures, and several items you cannot identify even on a good day. "This," he says solemnly, "is how we confront the great enemy." The plague. A mainstream historical fact rises like cold fog. The Black Death swept across Europe in the 14th century, killing millions, rewriting economies, collapsing institutions, and reshaping medicine for centuries to come. And without knowing anything about bacteria or fleas or rats or microscopic anything, medieval physicians tried, desperately, to make sense of a killing force they could not see. The doctor picks up a long-beaked mask, the kind you've seen in old drawings. The beak is stuffed with herbs, rosemary, mint, cloves, maybe lavender. Also possibly something weird because it is medieval medicine. "This protects us from the poisoned air," he says, slipping the mask over his face. His voice becomes echoey inside the beak. Sweet scents defend the lungs. You resist the urge to point out that your recent experience with devil's dung suggests scent is not reliable armour. He sets the mask down and guides you to a table covered in herbs. "During plague years," he explains, "we use strong smells to chase away the corruption." He hands you a bundle made of sage, rosemary and juniper bound tightly with twine. It smells pleasantly smoky and sharp. "Burn this," he says, to clear the air. Then he picks up something far less pleasant, a bag filled with onions. "Onions draw out poison," he says confidently. He slices one open with a small knife. "Place these around the room." He gestures meaningfully to the corners. You imagine medieval homes that smelled like a bizarre stir-fry of fear. A quirky tidbit surfaces. People believed loud noises could frighten away plague vapours. Bells were rung, cannons were fired, drums were beaten. Some towns even encouraged shouting. Imagine your doctor telling you to scream occasionally for your health. The doctor demonstrates by striking a small hand drum. The sound rattles the jars on the shelf. "Illness fears noise," he announces. You nod politely, wondering if illness has ever been truly terrified of percussion. He moves on to show you the infamous plague posy, a small bouquet of herbs and flowers meant to be inhaled frequently. He presses one into your hands. "Hold this to your nose when passing through corrupted streets." You inhale. Cloves and mint swirl into your lungs. Not terrible. Then he lifts a rod, long, thin, wooden. "To keep distance," he explains. "Touch the sick only with this." You nod, entirely supportive of long-distance everything in plague conditions. Historians still argue whether these methods were rooted in spiritual belief, humoral theory, or simple desperation. But the truth is, plague medicine was improvisation, survival by trial and error, and sometimes just error. He brings you to another table where wax tablets display astrological charts. "We consult the skies," he says. "Plague arrives under certain alignments." He points to Mars and Saturn. Their conjunction breeds corruption. You nod, remembering from earlier that medieval logic sees the planets as very active participants in your daily mood. He shows you a list of rules written on parchment. Do not bathe. Open pores invite poison. Avoid sleep. Evil vapours strike resting bodies. Do not eat fruit. It rots quickly, therefore spreads rot. Do not walk in south winds. They carry sickness. You raise a finger. Why south winds? He shrugs. They are warm and lazy. You decide not to pursue it. He lifts a jar containing a mixture that smells like vinegar and crushed herbs. Four Thieves vinegar, he says. Protection against plague. You remember hearing legends. 4 thieves who robbed houses of plague victims supposedly survived by dousing themselves in this concoction. Historians still debate whether the story is true or just good marketing. The doctor pours a drop onto your palm. It burns slightly. Rub this on your wrists and neck. You comply. It smells sharp, medicinal, and honestly a bit overconfident. Then he hands you a pouch of dried marigold petals. Wear this over your heart, he says. It guards the spirit. You tuck it into your sleeve. You are now carrying enough herbs to season an entire medieval feast. The most chilling part comes next. He leads you to a curtained corner. Behind it rests a wooden cot, empty, waiting. When plague strikes, he says quietly, we isolate the patient. His voice softens. We sang prayers. We burned herbs. We waited. You feel the weight of that last word, the helplessness hidden behind all the rituals. He steps away from the cot and stands straight again, donning his professional confidence like armour. But not all is despair, he says. Many lived, many recovered. He smiles gently. We work with the knowledge we have. And somehow, that is the heart of it. In the face of a catastrophe they didn't understand, medieval physicians tried everything. Flowers, noise, vinegar, charms, stars, steam, isolation. Some ideas helped. Many didn't. But behind it all was effort, care, hope in 1,000 strange forms. As you leave the plague chamber, clutching your herbal posy and marigold pouch, you feel a sober respect for those who lived through the darkness, fighting an invisible enemy with whatever tools they had, and you silently thank every future century for soap, microscopes, and vaccines. You step out of the plague chamber, clutching your posy and marigold pouch like the world's strangest good luck charms. The hallway outside feels quieter, softer, as though the stones themselves are relieved to leave the subject of plague behind. The doctor walks beside you more slowly now, his tone gentler, as if sensing you need something calmer, less death fog, more cozy bedtime. And fortunately, his next destination delivers exactly that. He opens a creaky wooden door, and you're greeted by a dim room lit with a single oil lamp casting warm, honey-coloured light. Thick wool blankets lie folded at the foot of a low bed. A small chest sits open, filled with dream-related tokens, lavender sachets, little carvings, inked charms, parchment slips with scribbled notes. A tapestry on the wall shows a person sleeping peacefully, while tiny symbolic creatures, birds, stars and spirals, hover nearby. This, the doctor says softly, is the chamber of dreams. Finally a room that doesn't smell like burning feathers, vinegar or fear. You step inside. The air is warm, dry, peaceful. It smells like lavender and old wood. Your shoulders drop 2 full inches. The doctor gestures for you to sit on the bed. The blanket beneath you is surprisingly soft. For once, no jars of creatures are making faint plopping noises in the background. In medieval medicine, he begins, dreams are not idle phantoms. They reveal the body's secrets. He says this with such conviction that you immediately feel pressure to remember every dream you've ever had. A mainstream historical fact drifts gently into place. Many medieval doctors believed sleep and dreams offered insights into the body's internal state. Certain dreams were linked to humoral imbalances. Dreams of running indicated excess heat. Dreams of water meant excessive cold or moisture. Dreams of heavy objects implied sluggish humours. Medical texts often included whole sections dedicated to dream interpretation. He opens a small leather-bound book filled with neat script and whimsical drawings. Here, he says, showing you an illustration of a man dreaming of fire while tucked safely under a fur blanket. If you dream of flames, the body is overheated. If you dream of snow, the humours are too cold. You nod slowly, realising your last dream involved a giant onion chasing you. You decide not to share. The doctor moves to the chest of dream charms. He picks up a little carved bird made of ash wood. Place this under your pillow, he says. It draws away restless spirits. You try not to think about what qualifies as a restless spirit. He hands you a lavender sachet. For calming the blood at night, he explains. You inhale. It smells crisp and soothing, a welcome change from the nightmarish scents in Section 7. A quirky tidbit tumbles into your mind. Monks in some medieval monasteries kept dream diaries, believing that recurring dreams were messages from the soul, or sometimes warnings about diet. If Brother Thomas dreamed of falling repeatedly, it might mean he had eaten too many descending foods, like pears or cabbage. Medieval dreams were basically Yelp reviews from your stomach. The doctor sits beside the bed and takes your wrist gently, a familiar gesture by now. But instead of checking your humours directly, he feels your pulse while asking, "What troubles your sleep?" You blink. This is almost modern psychology. You admit, softly, that your mind has been busy, overthinking, wandering. The doctor nods with sympathetic wisdom. The mind is a restless creature, he says, especially when the body's warmth is uneven. He gestures toward the small hearth burning in the corner. Warmth calms the humours and steadies the dreaming spirit. He encourages you to lie back against the pillows for demonstration purposes. You do, and honestly, it feels heavenly. He drapes a blanket lightly over your legs, then dims the oil lamp slightly. The room hums with stillness. Sleep must be invited, he says, not demanded. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians genuinely believed dreams offered medical clues or whether dream interpretation was simply comforting ritual. But as you lie there, wrapped in warmth, you can understand the appeal. When the world is unpredictable and sickness is mysterious, dreams are one of the few places where the subconscious feels like a guide. The doctor takes from the chest a small clay pot of sleep balm, a mixture of poppy, lavender and soft animal fat. He rubs a little between his fingers and dabs it lightly on your temples. It smells sweet, earthy, calming. To silence chattering thoughts, he says gently, and to quiet the winds inside your head. You try not to laugh, because honestly, you do have chattering thoughts. Medieval doctors accidentally nailed that one. He then picks up a tiny silver bell, barely larger than a thimble. Ring this once before sleep, he instructs. It clears the mind. You ring it softly. The sound is delicate and soothing, like a whisper of metal. A faint peace settles over your chest. Next, he shows you a parchment containing a short nighttime prayer. Even scholars recite this, he says. The prayer blends gratitude, humility, and a plea for calm dreams. It's simple, beautiful, almost ASMR-worthy. He lights a tiny bowl of rosemary and lets the gentle smoke drift upward. This keeps nightmares away, he murmurs, and fortifies the heart. The scent curls softly through the room, warm and herby. A fringed tidbit floats to the surface. Some medieval physicians believed dreams could predict illnesses before symptoms appeared. Dreaming of mud meant impending digestive trouble. Dreaming of flight meant too much heat in the upper humours. Dreaming of animals meant the body is restless. You suddenly hope none of your dreams involve leeches. The doctor finishes by handing you a warm cup of spiced milk. For sleep, he says, drink slowly. It tastes like nutmeg, honey and comfort. You sip. He watches with quiet approval. The blanket feels heavier, friendlier. When you stand again, reluctantly, the doctor says softly, "Tonight, your dreams will tell us how your humours fare." You don't know whether you believe that, but the room's warmth, the lavender, the low light, the quiet charm of medieval sleep rituals, they settle something inside you. You leave the chamber knowing one truth. Long before modern neuroscience, people understood intuitively that sleep is medicine, that dreams matter, and that sometimes the gentlest treatments are the ones that work. You step out of the dream chamber feeling soft around the edges, like your brain just wrapped itself in a warm blanket. The hallway you enter is brighter than before. Sunlight peeks through narrow windows, carrying with it a fresh breeze. You inhale. The air feels clean, crisp, almost playful. The doctor smiles, sensing your small surge of energy. "Good," he says. "You'll need your senses for this next lesson." That sentence is never reassuring. He leads you outside to a small courtyard where the sky opens overhead in a wide blue stretch. Birds hop lazily along the stone walls. A fountain burbles. It feels peaceful, tranquil, until the doctor raises a finger dramatically toward the sky and announces, "Behold, weather as medicine." You blink. Surely he does not mean actual weather. He absolutely means actual weather. In medieval medical thinking, the weather wasn't just something to complain about. It was an entire diagnostic category. Hot, cold, damp, dry. Every shift in the wind, every change in the air could wreak havoc on your humours. The doctor begins explaining this with the confidence of someone who genuinely believes humidity is out to get you. A mainstream historical fact settles in. Medieval medicine relied heavily on environmental theory, inherited from ancient Greek and Roman texts. Physicians believed health was shaped by airs, waters, and places. The climate, the seasons, the winds, even the altitude shaped your humours. A cold wind could chill your phlegm, a hot wind could ignite your bile. A foggy morning could settle moisture in your brain, unfortunate. You follow the doctor to the courtyard's edge, where a small table sits beneath a canopy. On it rests a tattered weather chart, a bowl of herbs, and a small iron wind vane shaped like a rooster. He taps it. "See how it points?" he says proudly. "The north wind approaches." You nod thoughtfully, trying to look impressed by a medieval weathercock. He opens a scroll showing 4 types of winds: north, cold and dry; south, warm and moist; east, dry and warm; west, moist and cold. Each wind affects the body differently, he explains. The north wind stiffens the joints, the south wind dulls the mind, the west wind encourages phlegm, and the east wind. He hesitates, as if remembering something unpleasant. The east wind causes irritability. You consider blaming the east wind for your entire personality. He gestures for you to sit on a stone bench. Above you, a few clouds drift lazily across the blue expanse. "Watch the sky," he instructs. "Tell me what you notice." You squint. You notice clouds, mostly clouds. He nods sagely. Moisture in the air. This could cause heaviness in the limbs. You wiggle your legs experimentally. They seem fine. Also, he adds, moodiness. You nod. That tracks. A quirky tidbit flutters in next. Some medieval texts claim moonlight can warp the brain's moisture, causing sleeplessness, melancholy, or sudden bursts of creativity. People were warned not to sleep directly beneath moonbeams unless they wanted their humours stirred into chaos. You glance upward, imagining moonlight as a mischievous toddler poking your brain. It feels accurate. The doctor now picks up a small wooden cup filled with something steamy. "Weather tea," he says, "made to balance whatever the air does to you." You take a sip. It tastes like nettle, mint, and judgment. He explains that the herbs inside shift depending on the season. Warming herbs in winter, cooling herbs in summer, drying herbs during rainy months, and moistening. Well, honestly, he doesn't clarify how one moistens a humour, and you're not brave enough to ask. He motions you toward the far side of the courtyard, where a tree stands tall and proud. Its leaves rustle in the breeze. "Trees tell us which winds are strongest," he says. He places a hand on the trunk dramatically. "Observe." You observe. The tree is definitely vibing. He continues, "If the leaves flutter at the edge, the wind affects only the surface humours, but if the branches sway, the deep humours are disturbed. You watch the branches sway gently and wonder if your deep humours feel disturbed or merely entertained." Historians still argue whether medieval doctors simply used weather as metaphor or truly believed the sky controlled the body. But one thing is certain. Before indoor climate control, people lived with weather constantly. It shaped their daily lives and their illnesses. So of course they saw patterns. He now directs your attention to the sun. Warmth from the sun fortifies the blood, he says, but too much heat stirs excess bile. He hands you a cloth hat. "Wear this, lest your humours heat too quickly." You put it on. You look ridiculous. He beams. Then he brings you to a large stone basin filled with rainwater. "Cold water," he says, dipping his fingers in, draws out the heat of rash tempers. He splashes a few droplets onto your wrist. You admit, it's refreshing. He smiles knowingly. Nature provides balance. A fringe tidbit drifts in gently. Some medieval scholars believed different seasons produced different personalities. Spring-born people were airy and quick-witted. Summer-born people were fiery. Autumn-born were melancholic and thoughtful. Winter-born were calm but prone to sluggishness. You're beginning to realize medieval doctors would absolutely have created astrology-based personality quizzes if given the chance. The doctor picks up a small bronze tool shaped like a scoop. Weather scraper, he says. You blink. A what? He demonstrates scraping your forearm lightly. To remove the air's influence, you bite your tongue to keep from laughing. He hands you a linen cloth infused with rosemary oil. Rub this on your chest when the fog is heavy, he says. Fog encourages cold humours. You nod solemnly, even though you know future you will absolutely forget to do this. He points toward the horizon where clouds gather. Storms, he says softly, stir the inner winds. People grow restless. Dreams become troubled. He glances at you. If a storm comes, drink warm milk with nutmeg. You smile. That sounds almost delicious. Finally, he hands you a small carved charm shaped like a cloud. This keeps the body steady when winds change, he explains. You tuck it into your pouch with your growing collection of medieval Pokemon items. As you leave the courtyard, the breeze ruffling your sleeves, you feel oddly serene. Medieval weather medicine might be scientifically questionable, but it's also poetic, seeing the body as part of nature, swayed by wind and sunlight and fog, just like anything else. And in a way, that's comforting, because sometimes the world outside does affect the world inside. You leave the weather courtyard wearing your absurd little hat, carrying your cloud-shaped charm, and trying very hard not to blame every passing breeze for rearranging your humours. The doctor, thrilled with your progress in atmospheric sensitivity, walks ahead with renewed purpose. His robes flap around his ankles. Your new charm clinks softly in your pocket like a tiny thundercloud made of wood. He stops before a tall oaken door carved with bunches of grapes, loaves of bread, fish, and herbs. Now, he says, hand on the latch, we address the most powerful medicine of all. He swings the door open dramatically. The diet rules from another universe. The room beyond looks like a cross between a pantry, an alchemist's lab, and a medieval version of a cooking show set. Shelves overflow with dried fruit, root vegetables, salted meats, grains, wheels of cheese, amphorae of wine, and baskets of mysterious plant matter that might be food, or might be medicine, or might be bait. You step inside cautiously. The doctor rubs his hands together with infectious enthusiasm. Food, he says solemnly, is the great sculptor of humours. He gestures to the shelves. Every flavour, every texture, every temperature, each tells your body how to behave. You suddenly picture your internal organs holding a chaotic council, meeting about your lunch. A mainstream historical fact strolls in casually. Medieval dietetics was every bit as important as herbs or surgery. Physicians believed food carried qualities, hot, cold, dry, wet, and those qualities directly shaped the humours. So diets weren't about calories or nutrition, they were about elemental balance. Your dinner was a weather event happening inside your stomach. The doctor walks over to a basket of apples. Apples, he says, are cooling and moistening. He hands one to you. You bite into it. It tastes like normal apple. He nods gravely as though you've just confirmed a scientific hypothesis. Then he points toward a hanging string of garlic. Garlic warms the blood, he says. Excellent for cold people. You want to ask why he assumes you're cold, but you suddenly remember the dream chamber blanket and decide, yeah, fair. He moves on to a bowl of figs. Figs are moistening and softening, he says. Too many will make the humours lazy. You nod, pretending this sentence makes sense. A quirky tidbit breezes in with perfect timing. Medieval people believed overeating lettuce caused sleepiness because lettuce was considered cold and moist, humours that drag the spirit downward. You think of modern salad-induced naps and decide medieval people may have accidentally predicted food comas. The doctor leads you to an imposing loaf of coarse brown bread. Bread, he announces, is foundational. You nod. Bread is foundational. But, he continues, white bread is hot and dry. Brown bread is cold and dry. Rye bread cools phlegm. Barley bread calms anger. You blink. Somewhere deep inside you, your inner carb lover is trying to map emotions to sandwich choices. He pulls out a jug of wine next. Wine is warming, he says. Good for cold humours, but dangerous for those with hot humours. You imagine medieval doctors diagnosing someone as too spicy for wine. He pours a tiny sip into a ladle and offers it. It tastes rich and slightly sour. He nods approvingly. Balances your mood, he says. You swallow politely, resisting the urge to say your mood currently needs a vacation, not wine. Historians still argue whether medieval doctors genuinely believed diet rules controlled personality traits, or simply used food as a practical tool since medicine was limited. But dietetics survived for centuries because it was accessible. You didn't need a leech, just a carrot. Speaking of carrots, the doctor picks up a bundle of them. Carrots warm the stomach, he says, but only when cooked. Raw carrots disturb the humours. This feels aggressively personal. You've eaten raw carrots your entire life. He moves to onions again. Onions purge bad moisture, he says. Eat them roasted in winter. You picture a medieval feast where everyone smells like onions and humoral purity. He then points to fish. Salted, dried, smoked. Fish is cold and moist, he explains. Good for hot-blooded temperaments. You wonder what hot-blooded meant in medieval terms. Probably enthusiasm again. Medieval doctors really hated enthusiasm. Now he guides you to a pot of steaming broth simmering over a small fire. Broths restore balance, he says. He ladles some into a clay cup and hands it to you. The broth is warm, comforting, infused with herbs. You sip and feel your shoulders relax. See, he says proudly, your humours settle. He then shows you a cluster of pears. Pears cool overheated bile, then walnuts. Walnuts strengthen the brain. You blink. He taps the shell. Because they resemble a brain. Doctrine of signatures strikes again. A fringe tidbit pops in with impeccable comedic timing. Some medieval physicians warned that too many beans caused excessive wind, which could disrupt bodily harmony and spiritual focus. You decide not to ask whether wind refers to digestion or humours, because the answer is probably both. The doctor gestures to a table covered with spices: ginger, cinnamon, pepper, cumin, saffron. Spices are powerful, he says. They heat the blood and cheer the spirit. You inhale the aroma. It does cheer the spirit. Finally, something medieval medicine and TikTok latte culture agree on. He picks up a dried plum. Prunes, he says, are cleansing. You nod politely. You know exactly what he means. Then he shows you a bowl of almonds. Almonds nourish the brain, but only in moderation. Too many cause dryness of the thoughts. You have no idea what dryness of thoughts is. You suspect you've experienced it during long meetings. Finally, he gestures at the entire room. Diet, he says softly, is the long road to balance. Each morsel shapes the body. Each flavour guides the humours. He presses a tiny parchment into your hand, a personalised medieval meal plan. It includes such gems as: avoid pears on stormy days. Do not mix fish with milk. Eat warm foods after emotional distress. Drink wine only when the moon is steady. Do not nap immediately after consuming cabbage. You nod like someone who definitely understands the concept of a steady moon. As you leave the diet chamber, your mind spins with the surreal logic of medieval nutrition. It's contradictory, poetic, earnest, and occasionally absurd. But hidden within it is a simple truth. Food is powerful. Food restores, food reassures, and even if medieval doctors weren't quite right, they understood that eating well was one of the few things people could control in an uncertain world. You tuck the meal plan into your pouch, right beside your weather charm, your marigold petals, your lavender sachet, and whatever remains of your dignity. Your humours, amazingly, remain mostly calm. You exit the diet chamber feeling like you've just completed a semester-long course in medieval nutrition, with a minor in cabbage warnings and a major in foods that upset the moon. Your brain buzzes with dietary rules that would make a modern dietitian faint into a bowl of kale. But the doctor, energized by your growing expertise, ushers you toward a narrow spiral staircase leading downward. The air cools as you descend. The light fades. You hear the faint clink of glass, the soft rustle of paper, and the unmistakable bubbling of substances you probably should not inhale. When you reach the bottom, the doctor lights a lantern, and the chamber reveals itself slowly. Shelves crammed with bottles, strange powders, metal tools shaped like spoons, funnels, and questionable scoops, a cauldron simmering gently, and in the centre, an entire table of ingredients that can only be described as weird things someone once found and decided must be medicine. The doctor spreads his arms with pride. "Welcome," he says with a dramatic whisper, "to the vault of stranger potions and curious cures." Your humours tremble. He walks to the nearest shelf and lifts a tiny jar filled with shimmering flakes. "Gold leaf," he says. used to strengthen the heart and elevate the spirit. He sprinkles a bit onto his palm. The flakes catch the lantern light like miniature stars. Taken in wine, he adds casually. You nod politely, even as your wallet cries retroactive tears for medieval patients who had to fund such luxury. A mainstream historical fact slips comfortably into place. Many medieval physicians believed precious metals, gold, silver, even pearls, held curative powers, especially for the wealthy. Powdered gems, mineral infusions, even liquefied metals found their way into high-status remedies. If you were rich, your medicine sparkled, literally. The doctor moves on to a jar of powder the colour of bone-white dust. Eggshell ash, he says, useful for stomach ailments. We burn the shells, grind them finely, and mix with wine. That's right, your medieval antacid was breakfast ashes. He hands you a pinch. It feels like chalk. You hand it back before he decides today is the day you try it. Then he reveals something even stranger. A little bottle filled with viscous red liquid. Dragon's blood, he announces. You choke. He clarifies quickly. A resin from a special tree. You breathe again. It seals wounds, strengthens gums, and protects against corruption. The resin glows in the lantern light like something magical, and for a moment you almost understand the medieval fascination with naming things dramatically. Next, he lifts a jar labelled Powder of Mummy. You blink. He nods solemnly. Yes, exactly what it sounds like. A quirky tidbit flashes like a warning sign. For centuries, Europeans ground up actual Egyptian mummies and used the powder as medicine, believing the preserved flesh contained powerful healing properties. Apothecaries sold it. Physicians prescribed it. People consumed it. You look at the jar with deep spiritual discomfort and take 3 steps back. The doctor, completely unbothered, moves to a small pot marked Tincture of Viper. Inside, a snake-shaped root steeps in dark liquid. Excellent for restoring vitality, he says. The snake sheds weakness. You nod with the expression of someone who will absolutely not be consuming snake juice tonight. He opens a wooden box containing dried beetles. Spanish fly, he says. You shake your head violently. He raises an eyebrow. Do not worry, he says. We do not use it for excitement. You stare. He clarifies. We use it to draw out infections. You nod slowly, relieved and horrified simultaneously. He moves to a bowl of crushed charcoal. Charcoal absorbs poison, he explains, but only certain poisons. Others it angers. You ask softly, how do you know which poisons? He shrugs. Trial, error. You swallow. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians genuinely believed some of these ingredients were magical, or simply observed that certain minerals and plant resins had real effects. But stranger ingredients, like mummy powder or metals, came from a mix of symbolism, desperation, and the simple human desire for extraordinary cures. The doctor now lifts a jar filled with dark, sticky goo. Tar ointment, he says, good for rashes. You lean closer. It smells like a medieval parking lot. He hands you a tiny dab. It is exactly as sticky as your imagination feared. Next, he picks up a small cloth sachet containing pale grey dust. Toadstone powder, he says. You prepare for the worst. It comes from fish, he adds. You blink. We call it toadstone. It protects against poison. You don't ask why a fish stone is called a toadstone. You've learned not to ask questions here. Then, with dramatic flair, he pulls out a jar containing something pale and hairy. You brace yourself. Bear grease, he says cheerfully. You lose your composure. He explains, used for joint stiffness and hair growth. You glance at his hair, luxurious for a medieval doctor. It makes sense now. A fringe tidbit arrives like a tiny disaster. Some medieval cures involved live spiders mashed into butter to treat fever or infection. You quietly pray he does not produce any spider butter tonight. He doesn't. Instead, he moves to a cauldron simmering with a deep purple mixture. This, he says, is a tonic of violet, rosemary, honey, and powdered pearl. You inhale. It smells floral and sweet. He pours a single drop into a wooden spoon and offers it. You taste it. Light, slightly gritty, oddly pleasant. He grins. A noble cure, he says, used by queens. Finally, he gestures over the entire chaotic table. These potions, he says softly, represent our deepest hopes. When the usual remedies fail, People seek wonders. They look for cures in mystery and symbolism in extravagance. He picks up a tiny vial of shimmering dust. Sometimes, he whispers, healing begins with believing something extraordinary can help. You stand quietly, absorbing the sincerity beneath the strangeness. Because in a world without microscopes or antibiotics, or even a clear understanding of the body, people wanted cures that felt powerful, magical, special. The doctor hands you a small jar of harmless-looking balm, something made of honey, herbs, and a bit of wax. Take this, he says, a gentle remedy. No powders of ancient kings inside. You accept it gratefully, and as you leave the vault of strange cures, gold flecks, ash, resins, snake tinctures and bear grease still swirling in your thoughts, you realize that medieval medicine wasn't just about misunderstanding biology. It was about creativity, fear, hope, and the human desire to make sense of suffering, even if it meant inventing cures from dust and dreams. Your humours somehow remain steady. You climb the stairs out of the vault of strange potions feeling a little dazed, and who can blame you? You've spent the last hour staring at powdered mummy jars, snake tinctures, gold leaf wine, and bear grease hair tonic. Your brain hums like a lute string stretched too tight. Even your humours are probably filing paperwork. The doctor leads you slowly back into the main hall, a long, warm space lit by dozens of candles. Their soft glow flickers against the stone walls, casting a gentle dance of shadows. For the first time tonight, he walks without urgency. No dramatic cloak swishing, no grand proclamations, no jars of wiggling creatures held threateningly close to your face. Just calm, measured steps. You feel it immediately. This is the final lesson. He gestures toward a small wooden bench near the hearth and motions for you to sit. The fire crackles softly, comfortable, reassuring, not the sort that hints at upcoming cauterization. You settle down, feeling the warmth seep into your bones. The doctor sits beside you, his posture relaxed, his eyes warm and thoughtful. Tonight, he begins quietly, you've seen many cures, many beliefs, many strange and wonderful attempts to understand the human body. You nod. Your humours nod. Your inner leech PTSD nods. But now, he continues, I will tell you why medieval doctors believed in all of it. Every bath, every herb, every charm, every bone powder, every planetary alignment, every prayer, every bizarre brew. He folds his hands in his lap. His voice becomes almost tender. You see, we lived in a world without certainty. A mainstream historical fact rises gently in your thoughts. Before modern science, illness felt unpredictable, mysterious, terrifying. People didn't know about bacteria, viruses, immune systems, hormones, or microscopic life. They knew pain, fever, fatigue, loss. And without clear explanations, the human mind creates its own frameworks, systems that feel logical, comforting, and orderly, even when they're wrong. The doctor gazes into the fire. Humours gave us a language. Astrology gave us patterns. Herbs gave us control. Charms gave us comfort. Surgery gave us hope. And strange potions. He chuckles softly. Those gave us courage to keep trying. He glances toward the shelves lining the room, some filled with careful notes, others with dried herbs, others with relics and charms. These tools, he says, were bridges across fear. You let that sit in the silence for a moment. He rises slowly and leads you to a large table nearby. Spread across it is a mixture of medieval knowledge, herb bundles, star charts, surgical tools, dream charms, weather notes, and recipes scrawled on parchment. Looking at it now, you don't see chaos. You see effort. 1,000 years of human effort to relieve suffering. The doctor rests his hand on the table. Historians still argue, he says softly, whether we truly believed every cure worked exactly as described. Some of us did. Some doubted. Some followed the books. Some followed the heart. He touches the parchment lightly. But all of us wanted to heal. He walks to the window and opens the shutters a little. Cool night air drifts in, carrying the distant sound of bells. Your world, he says, knows so much more. Microscopes, medicines, vaccines, science that sees the invisible. He turns to you with a small, proud smile. But do not forget. He points to your basket of herbs, your tiny dream sachet, your weather charm, your sleep balm, your marigold pouch. We taught the world something too, you raise an eyebrow. We taught it that the body is connected to the mind, that emotions matter, that routines soothe, that nature helps, that ritual comforts, that healing is not only physical, it is sensory, emotional, human. A quirky tidbit drifts in. Medieval doctors often prescribed rest, warm baths, quiet rooms, gentle walks, and comforting foods, not out of science, but instinct. And those instincts turned out to be pretty good. Balance, he says, is not only in the humours, it is in how we live. You feel the weight of that. Warm, steady, grounding. He gestures for you to follow him to the hearth once more. Sit, he says gently. Listen to the fire. The flames crackle softly, creating the kind of sound that makes eyelids droop on their own. The doctor lowers his voice. Your humours, your dreams, your spirit. They are not wild forces to be feared. They are parts of you, and tonight you have learned how our ancestors tried, clumsily, bravely, to care for them. He places a small linen bag into your hands. Inside is a gentle blend of herbs from the garden, lavender, chamomile, sage, and mint. A gift, he says, not magic, not science, just comfort. You close your fingers around it. He smiles warmly. You have walked through the world of medieval belief, he says, and you have seen that behind every strange cure was the same thing that guides healers in your time. His voice softens. A wish to ease suffering. He stands, bows slightly and steps back. The candles flicker, the fire hums, the air settles, and you realize the strangest thing of all. You actually feel calm, maybe even a little wiser, and utterly ready for the soft hush of sleep. The doctor's footsteps fade gently down the corridor, leaving you alone with the warm breathing of the fire. The room feels softer now, the shadows slower, the air warm but not heavy. You let your shoulders loosen, sinking just a little deeper into the quiet space, the weight of the day slipping away like dust in a slow breeze. Take a slow breath in and let it roll out gently. The flickering light paints warm lines across the stone walls, moving slowly, as if they too are settling into the stillness. You feel the echoes of every place you've travelled tonight. The herb garden's sunlight, the dream chamber's hush, the soft clinking of charms, even the silly warmth of your tiny cloud-shaped amulet. All of it begins to blend together into one long exhale of comfort. Your mind drifts over the strange cures you witnessed, not with confusion now, but with a kind of softness. People long ago did the best they could with the world they understood. They reached for warmth, for scent, for ritual, for meaning, the same way you reach for a blanket or a warm drink or a quiet moment at night. The world changes, but humans remain tender in the same familiar ways. Let the last of the tension leave your body. Let the day grow distant. Let the room grow quieter still. Imagine the gentle crackle of the fire dimming into a soft glow. Imagine the night air cooling your thoughts, smoothing away any rough edges left in the mind. You're safe here. You're warm. You're allowed to rest. Take one more slow breath and let your thoughts dissolve into the quiet. Sleep is close now, soft, easy, and waiting just for you.